How's it going? Okay. I'm going to... Oh, hey, Jim. Wait, Jim. Jim who? Jim the cringy kid? Okay. I'm going to attempt something more painful than childbirth. Huh. What, is something wrong? Hey, hold on, let me check. Did you comment on my thing? Like my, Alright, man. See ya. Alright, man. Take your time, man. Take your time, cool off. Take a mental break, dude. Have a nice one. I hope you get better, man. If by getting better means you don't, if you need to not watch me to get better, please don't watch me. I will not be angry at you. Take literally every second. You want to be gone for a day, a year, a decade, a century, whatever. You take that time, man. Take good care, dude. And I hope that you can find a positive, outcome to your journey. Oh, sorry, didn't mean to say that. Shit. I'm sorry. Or your Bye, man. I get rid of him. Snowy slopes. Okay, then I just said we're going to be doing something possibly more painful than childbirth. I want to do something I've never done in Minecraft before. Might be even more difficult than fighting the Ender Dragon or the Wither combined. I'm going to try to locate myself a block of deep slate, emerald, ore. It is one of the rarest blocks in the game. I mean, the rarest block is easily the dragon egg with only like 2 pieces of blocks you can get without commands, run the mill survival world, right? It's gotta be that. Deep emerald ore block. Emerald only really spawns like 1 chunk. Yeah, I have. I beat it in like 100 days. Let's say if that guy has a problem with me, I don't know what he would have a problem with me with, because I literally did nothing. I'd say if you try to whoop my ass, I'm gonna fight back, Iron Golem. Oh, wow. You must not live in America then. I see ya. Have a nice one. Did you know? On the Bedrock edition of Minecraft, you can compost grass blocks. Not even joking, by the way. At least I'm pretty sure you can. I'm gonna watch Morbid Reality 18 by Alien. Give me your ND Falls. Well, I go see if I can find some deep slate emerald because I'll be mining it deep slate. Yeah. Anyway, plus it sounds like a fun thing to have. Okay, I'm gonna warn people in this stream, and it's gonna bother them very bad. I'm gonna avoid the iron. I will come back for it one day. I will. My goodness, there must be so much iron I can get. So yeah, this morbid reality video, it's called r/morbid reality 14 or 18, and it's by Alarius. And man, you know it's gonna be good when you get the frickin'.
Any curiosity can be quelled with a simple search term. And yet when we hit enter and look upon the very answer we sought out to find, Many of us experience a very peculiar kind of cognitive dissonance. The answer you sought out is grotesque and disturbing, and yet you can't look away, and you don't know why. It's almost like coming to grips with our morbid reality is a task fit for no one. It starts out as a cough, then a sniffle, then a headache, then stiffness of the neck. And if you're the unlucky 25%, that quickly develops into paralysis. The disease is poliomyelitis.
Damn it,
it's one of the scariest
I knew it.
viruses that humanity has ever dealt with and successfully eradicated. Many people born after 1960 really aren't aware of just how devastating polio was. For the
Roosevelt had it.
You had a 25% chance of never being able to walk again,
That
eat by yourself,
sucks.
breathe by yourself. So it begs the question, for the 25% of people who would catch polio and develop paralysis, how would they go on living
Iron
lives?
lung. They put them in these giant ass machines
What was their
called
reality?
iron lungs.
This is an iron lung. It's a type of negative pressure.
No, I'd rather jump off a building than go on an iron lung, man. To a certain degree. I mean, shit. If I can't even use my hands, I have to be a freaking head stuck there. You have the right to shoot me and kill me. Like, I just don't want to live anymore. I'm not insulting people who live like that. I envy people who are able to, like, survive like that. Unless you play my favorite TV shows or shit like that. But, dude, that's gotta suck. Like, you just can't do anything. You can't go outside to go to your friends. You can't, by yourself. You can't just go read a book, play a game, hang out with your buddies. You can't drive around. No, there's none of that. You're screwed. That is sad. Those are children.
A mechanical respirator which encloses most of the person's body and varies the
poor
air pressure in
kids.
the enclosed space. You see, polio
They had such a
didn't
good
just
life ahead of them, and now
destroy
their
nerves in your spine,
lives are ruined by
making it difficult
polio.
for you to control your limbs. It held your muscles hostage too. So much so that when people would contract poliomyelitis and then develop paralysis, their diaphragms would stop working. They'd simply lose the ability to breathe by themselves. And that's exactly what this machine was made for. The negative pressure created in the iron lung would artificially raise and lower the chest of patients who were unfortunate enough to be lying inside of it. The iron lung was infamous for many reasons. Its deep association with polio left it with a very negative reputation. But another thing made it infamous too. For as much as the iron lung preserved the life of the patient residing inside of it, it absolutely was not a cakewalk. Patients, both adults and children alike, needed to learn how to eat and speak in between artificial breaths. It was nearly an expectation that a new patient would choke on food before they figured out the cadence of their artificial breaths.
That little kid's
Speaking,
painting.
of course, was incredibly difficult to do, but
Good job,
these people
little dude.
persevered. And many of them would go on to survive outside of the iron lung. Many of those people being children. The immune systems of children are pretty flexible.
Kids
so
were
when a
not
child would
immune
show
from that.
signs of a polio infection
No, you should be
and
surprised. Kids
subsequent symptoms of
and
paralysis,
elderly are
these
really
children would be
the most
placed in the iron
struck.
lung with the expectation of remaining inside of the iron lung until their bodies fought off the infection. And as a result, many children survived to become adults. But this wasn't universal. There were children who simply never got better. This would be especially true with adults. There was a quarter chance that you would be paralyzed forever, and no amount of staying inside of the iron lung would remedy that. It would just alleviate your symptoms. This is Diane Odell. She was born February 13th, 1947, and she lived in Tennessee her whole life, most of that life being spent inside of an iron lung. At the age of 3, she contracted spinal polio. This subtype of polio primarily attacks and destroys the upper part of the cervical spinal cord. This immediately causes paralysis of the diaphragm, leaving Diane Odell with the inability to breathe by herself. It also paralyzes the muscles needed for swallowing. This left Diane with almost an inability to breathe by herself and swallow.
Yeah, President Roosevelt.
All at the age of 3. But because she was
it was Teddy.
Her immune system was stacking the damage.
I think it was Teddy.
Short periods outside of her iron lung, and this would be the case all the way through her childhood up until she was 20. when she had to remain inside the iron lung for the rest of her life. But Diane wasn't discouraged. She still had a zest for life. And 1 year became 2, 2 became 5, 5 became 10, and then over time, Diane became
Franklin D.
one
Roosevelt.
of the longest users of the iron lung, being sealed inside of it
And
for nearly 6
he hid it from the world. He went out of his way to hide his paralysis because he knew. I'm not knocking him, but he knew that if the American people saw that he was sick and he couldn't like stand by himself, they would ridicule him. So we had to get smart about learning how to hide the fact that he had polio.
Users of the iron lung, being sealed inside of it for nearly 60 years. When interviewed about her life inside of an iron lung, Diane had this to say: "I've had 2 dreams in my life, the ability to write without the help of others, and to write my own letters and perhaps books. My dream of writing a book without help has come true. I had started a children's book over 12 years ago. The computer I had then gave me nothing but frustration. It must have been 3 years before I realized that the method of voice recognition that I was using would never work for my voice. It broke my heart to think of all the wasted money people had contributed to my benefit. Now my expectations have been more than fully realized. I am making good progress." Diane had many successes in her life, despite her condition.
That's
Although
good.
she could not attend high school, she completed her studies by having
I feel
classmates or
nothing but
teachers
pride to
bring
those
school assignments to
people
her
that can
home.
actually
She would
make
lean on her
that
friends
of
and
a
family to help
horrible
her
situation.
transcribe some of the questions and problems.
Oh shit. Tough blobs.
Her perseverance didn't go unnoticed. In 1987, she received an honorary from the very college that she attempted to graduate from. And in 1991, she finished her children's book. It took her 10 years to write, and she was able to publish it in 2001, where shortly after, Diane met Vice President Al Gore at a Christmas gala in her honor. She was truly an inspiration to everyone, living proof that regardless of your situation, you don't have to give up. You still have agency. You still have power. And you can make remarkable changes in your life regardless of any negative circumstances. Over the course of the early 2000s, she would meet multiple politicians and celebrities. She would be interviewed by the Associated Press, many people asking questions about her children's book and what motivated her to write it. She even had a documentary made about her in hopes to raise money to support her continued care. At this point, she was 61 years old, and being in an iron lung was incredibly expensive. It cost $61,000 a year just to keep her alive. Over the course of many interviews and a documentary, Diane would go into
it's
detail
expensive. It
about
costs
how
more than a
her life
car.
had been threatened twice, in 1957 and 1974. Both years, there were major power outages in her neighborhood, and because of those power outages, her iron lung stopped working, which means she stopped breathing. Her family on both occasions saved her life by using a hand-powered respirator until the power was restored. And in 1995, the Tennessee Valley Authority provided the Odell family with a generator large enough to power the house in case of future power outages. And that gave the Odell family a lot of reassurance. They knew that if anything went wrong with the power grid, Diane would continue to breathe.
That's good. Let's say if I were in an iron lung and I had to survive, I would definitely hook up myself to a backup generator.
It would be on May 28th, 2008. Just like in the years before, the power outage was sudden, and no one knew how long it would last.
I think I've heard about this.
What was truly eerie
Did she not
was
survive?
the silence. For the longest time, Diane's neighbors had grown accustomed to the very loud noise that Diane's iron lung created. And on this day, they heard nothing. Just 24 hours before, thunderstorms had blown trees onto a power line, depriving the Odell household of vital power. But they had the generator, so everything was going to be okay. Until it didn't work. The generator failed to kick in. And when the Odell family tried to use their artificial respirator, that wouldn't work either. They even tried to pump the iron lung manually. It was a desperate attempt to save Diane, but it just wasn't enough. But Diane Odell could not be saved. She died a few minutes later. The family was quoted saying, "We did everything we could do, but
at least she doesn't have
breathing."
Like, I'm not saying I hope she did die. It's sad that she did, but at least she doesn't have to go through that hell anymore.
And she just didn't have enough strength to keep going.
Her suffering is now gone. Poor lady. That's got to be a face worse
It's
than
September
that.
3rd, 1939.
I feel bad for any people left in the iron lung. There's people that survived that are in those.
And earlier that month, France began the limited SAR offensive. But by mid-October, they had withdrawn to their start lines. Germany was going to invade France. This was the beginning of the Battle of France. Between the years of 1939 and 1940, the French government and military were coming to terms that the German military completely avoided their biggest defense, the Maginot Line, a set of fortifications along the border with Germany that, for the longest time, was seen as an assurance, a necessary precaution against Germany's military aggression. Little did they know that Germany just decided to invade through Belgium. That would lead to many bloody encounters.
They used the Gustav gun to punch holes through the bunkers along that line, didn't they?
Greater than 73,000. It wouldn't be long until the inevitable happened. On June 22nd, 1940, France was completely invaded and occupied by German military personnel. And during this time, there was a lot of lawlessness. Police departments and government organizations were fractured. The nation was primarily policed and regulated by the German military. And they were spread thin across the entire nation. These unfortunate circumstances left a lot of room for a lot of
I don't know if I'd ever do a podcast.
People. This is Marcel André Pigeot. Born on January 17th, 1897, Marcel would spend most of his time in Yonne, in north-central France, and during his teenage years, he got a taste for criminality. He robbed a post box and was charged with theft and damage to public property. And as a result, he was given a rigorous psychiatric evaluation, resulting in charges being dismissed when it was judged that he had mental illness. But these claims are disputed. While his future behavior would be incredibly heinous, no one really knew if he was insane or not. The reason being, as he grew up during his teenage years, while still being a criminal, he was still professional. He aspired to be a doctor. He wanted to be taken seriously, even if he was thrown out of school consistently because of his deviant acts. He would finish his primary education in 1915 and then immediately join the French army in World War I. Entering service in 1916, he wouldn't see a lot of action. The first battle that he ever fought in left him gassed and wounded. During his recovery, he got back into his old habits. Marcel couldn't help himself. Petty theft was his compulsion. He would go around to other...
He's gonna find someone who's gonna fight back. I know it.
Blankets, wallets, letters, and photographs. Eventually, he would be caught and sent to another mental institution where he'd be diagnosed again with a litany of mental disorders. But despite that, once he healed, the French military and government sent him back out to fight another battle, where coincidentally would be mutilated by a grenade, with the belief being that he dropped a grenade on his own foot in order to get out of the war. And as a result of his severe wartime injury, he received a sizable disability pension. While he was fighting for his homeland, Marcel decided to get serious about his education. While on the front lines, he completed medical school in 8 months. He received his medical degree in December of 1921. He would then relocate to the county that he was born in, and then began working as a medical doctor for a practice, where he earned a considerable amount of money. But as always, Marcel couldn't help himself. He had to be a delinquent. He
had to be plucky now, didn't he?
He began stealing medicine from the practice that he worked at to self-medicate, along with getting a reputation for dubious medical practices, many of which were very illegal, with one of the services that he would sell being the termination of pregnancies. 5 years would pass with that reputation growing, everybody in the community knowing that he was an unscrupulous doctor. Little did they know that in 1926, Marcel had already committed his first murder. The victim's name was Louise de Laval, an elderly patient's daughter,
guy's a menace,
whom Pigeot had an affair with in 1926. De Laval disappeared during May of that year. It was odd, her disappearance was sudden, and many of Marcel's neighbors noted his difficulty in placing a large object in the trunk of his car. Police investigated, but eventually dismissed her case as a runaway. That same year, Marcel campaigned for mayor of the county that he was living in,
Two geos and one
hired
frame.
someone to disrupt a political debate with his opponent. As a result, he would ultimately win and then use his newfound political position to embezzle local government funds.
Dude, this guy's a menace.
First murder and dubious.
He needs to go to jail.
Marcel would get married to Georgette Labai, and for a moment, things were calm, at least until 1940. After Germany defeated France in 1940, the occupation of the conquered nation was swift and devastating. French citizens would quickly have their possessions and property confiscated and then drafted into forced labor in Germany. Marcel provided false medical disability certificates to people who were drafted. He also treated the illnesses of workers who had returned. In July 1942, he was convicted of overprescribing narcotics, even though 2 addicts who would have testified against him had disappeared. He would then be fined 2,400 francs. While it seemed that he was punished for altruism, he was really punished for breaking the law and citizens as a way
Actual
to make money.
menace.
Those narcotics and disability certificates were not free, and what Marcel took away from this encounter was that he needed to be a little bit more sneaky about any future
Actual
illegal business prospects.
menace.
And over time, Marcel devised the perfect method of making illegal money. Marcel would come into contact with French men and women who wanted to flee the nation. They wanted to escape German occupation with the hopes of finding salvation anywhere.
Maybe that's like the only good thing he did.
Marcel pretended to have a means of getting people who were wanted by the German military or the Vichy government to safety outside of France. Marcel claimed that he could arrange passage to Argentina or elsewhere in South America through Portugal for the price of 25,000 francs per person.
Damn.
And unfortunately, 3 people believed him. Their names were Raoul, Edmund, and Rene. Whilst following his direction, they were lured into his home, where he would inform them that in order to go to Portugal, they needed to be inoculated against certain diseases. He would then present a filled syringe, all while assuring his victims that it was just a vaccine, when in reality, it was concentrated cyanide. He would inject them, and these people would writhe in pain and then ultimately pass away.
Actual piece of shit.
Situation and rob his victims of everything that they
had. Actual scumbag.
Valuables of desperate people. He would then get rid of the evidence. With
this guy's an evil person.
He would incinerate what was left behind.
Holy
with
shit!
All the money that he stole from those first 3 victims, Marcel decided to splurge on a large Parisian townhouse.
What a
and to
dick!
Jail time, he would pay.
Can you imagine like Jewish survivors in the Holocaust trying to go for him?
Money that.
Like, can you imagine being a Jewish survivor during the Holocaust? You survived the Germans. You go to this guy just to go escape, and this dumbass literally injects you and steals all your shit and kills you. This guy's an actual scumbag.
For being paid by Marcel was illegal. They didn't know how he acquired the money, and they only took issue when they found out that he was earning money through a supposed secret passageway outside of France. The Gestapo assumed that most of the people who were trying to escape France were either Jewish or part of a French resistance force, and those 2 people groups were viewed and deemed as enemies of Germany. So in order to find out if this was true or not, the Gestapo tortured a member of the French resistance who would eventually name Marcel Pigeot as the leader of the entire operation. But what came to the surprise of the Gestapo is that there was no escape route, and it was simply just a way for Marcel to rob people. It wouldn't be until the 11th
Oh,
of
it's a
March
mineshaft
1944
X
when the French
Ancient
police
City.
responding to a complaint about a foul state.
I have to admit this, guys. I'm very scared of ancient cities. It's because of the warden. It does not. By the way, the sonic blast is the problem. I don't want to go here. You know, I shouldn't even be here without heals. By the way, you want to hear a scary fact about the warden? It doesn't matter your health or your armor value. If you get hit by the sonic blast, the blast will automatically pierce your armor. It does not matter how much armor you have. It will do 5 hearts or its damage regardless. Making the sonic blast one of the most dangerous attacks in the game. Because even though you can be really beefy and sturdy against anything in the game, it just doesn't matter. It really doesn't.
In the area, found the remains of many Jewish and French resistance fighters who attempted to leave the nation. Marcel genuinely believed that incinerating the evidence would make it difficult for the police to arrest him. Unfortunately for him, smoke has to go somewhere. And the quicklime, that doesn't destroy evidence. If anything, it preserves it. So when Marcel's backyard was dug up, evidence was found. Lots and lots of evidence.
Dude.
It would take 7 months for the French police and German Gestapo to find and arrest Marcel. He had been hiding with friends, and over time, he found it more and more difficult to find a place to hide out. And there was a lot of motivation to find him, most of it being spearheaded by the Gestapo, because during his spree of violent theft, he had inadvertently killed Germans. On October 31st of 1944, Marcel
he pissed off the Nazis.
He was caught at a train station, and once arrested, the French police discovered 31,700 francs and 50 different sets of identity documents in his pocket.
Damn.
He will be immediately imprisoned at the Lausanne prison, and he claimed he was innocent and that he had only taken the lives of the enemies of France. And any evidence found in his house, both burnt and covered in quicklime, was already there when he purchased it. After hearing his plea, prosecutors charged him with at least 27 murders for profit. Their estimate when it comes to how much money he earned from these gruesome acts were over 200 million French francs, which in today's money is a little over $33,000. When it was all said and done, Marcel André Pigeot received 135 criminal charges for the gruesome deaths of 27 people. And 2 years later, on May 25th, 1946, Marcel André Pigeot was sentenced to death via the guillotine.
I'm about to say, if this guy doesn't get death, I'd be damn well surprised.
When twins are joined in utero, they are known as conjoined twins, commonly known as Siamese twins. It's an incredibly rare phenomenon, so rare in fact that the occurrence percentage is debated upon, the numbers being between 1 in 49,000 births or 1 in 189,000 births, with a higher rate of occurrence in Southwest Asia and Africa. And because it's such a severe disability, approximately half of children born conjoined are stillborn. There are currently 2 hypotheses about the development of conjoined twins, with the first one being that a single fertilized egg during the process of dividing to create twins doesn't completely separate, and the second popular theory being that Siamese twins are the result of a fusion of 2 fertilized eggs that occurs earlier in development. But what about the children who survive after birth, who seem to live healthy lives, with the only difficulty being that
is really crazy how the human biology just works like that.
They would be seen as freaks, completely excommunicated from society.
That's sad.
A bad omen. As time progressed, those feelings really didn't change. Instead of being a bad omen, you're a living, breathing oddity. Something to be looked at and something to be marketed.
That's sad. People really go out of their way to abuse others, even though
on May 20th, 1912.
Of their disabilities, just to make a profit.
A normal family, and their parents on 2 occasions refused to have Margaret and Mary separated. At the time, there was really no guarantee that they'd survive the procedure.
Yeah.
The only reason why they were motivated to do so was because during those 2 times, their disability became difficult to deal with, especially when they were young children. But as they grew up, their family managed to make things work, with one of the notable ways being that they never went to school. Most of their education was private. A tutor would come in occasionally during the week and educate them. And at the age of 14, Margaret and Mary wanted to capitalize on their disability.
You didn't have to be able to go to school back then.
They had brainstormed a vaudeville performance, and they wanted to pursue that career in New York. But unfortunately, because of their disability, they attracted a lot of negative attention. The press would go on and on about whether or not they would be separated, how would any intimate relationships work between the siblings, and even a rumor about Mary Gibb contracting influenza, and whether or not their physical circumstances would leave Margaret vulnerable to catching the disease too. All of this wild speculation led to their
if their bloodstreams are conjoined, I'd assume that they would definitely, if one catches the disease, the other one would.
Just as quickly as they entered. But their wants to be entertainers never really went away. Instead, they just chose to do the same act in a better environment. From the 1920s all the way up to the 30s, Margaret and Mary Gibb performed and worked for many circuses and freak shows. They were so popular, in fact, their performance didn't just stay in the United States. They would travel to Paris, Germany, and Switzerland. And after 12 years of traveling with multiple circuses and performing in multiple nations, the sisters would return home. And with the excess income that they had generated from all of these performances, they were able to invest in a business. The store was called the Mary and Margaret Shop. and they sold cards, novelties, vases, and baby clothes. The store would remain open for 7 years until they would decide to close it. At that point, people weren't necessarily going to the store to buy anything, they were going to the store to see them. And both Mary and Margaret were absolutely tired of people gawking at them and treating them as some sort of oddity. At that point, they had plenty of money to retire, so they decided to do that. And they also decided to not be separated. At this point, it was the early 60s, and there was maybe a chance that they would both survive the procedure, but being connected was an integral part of their identity, and they didn't want to sacrifice that. They had lived this way for their whole lives. Why change now? They understood the consequences of staying conjoined for that long. The older they age, the higher the likelihood that they will start sharing medical issues and ailments. And that's exactly what happened. In 1966, it was discovered that Margaret had cancer in her bladder, which over the next years spread to her lungs. However, Mary did not want to be separated from her sister. Regardless of the risk factor of her potentially contracting cancer as well, it wouldn't be until a year later, on August 26th, 1967, that both Margaret and Mary passed away. Margaret's cancer had metastasized. It was
that sucks.
Her body had become.
I'm not surprised. Like, not saying anything like, oh, well, no. I would not be surprised if one conjoined twin gets cancer and it metastasizes. The other conjoined twin is absolutely screwed if the cancer is not obliterated or contained. Oh.
Because of it, and less than 2 minutes later, Mary would also pass away.
That sucks.
This is Ayano Tokumasu, a Japanese student attending a language school in Toronto. And like many, she wanted to see the Niagara Falls, so she and her friends planned to make a quick day trip to see the natural wonder.
Do not tell me.
They chose to drive over the border so they could see it
on
the American
she's
side.
Gonna jump
but
in.
Because the American side is a little awkwardly placed, Ayano decided to step over the safety railing to get a better look. And for a moment, everything was good. Her vantage point was nice, and her friends were nearby just in case anything went wrong. And when she decided to step back over the railing to stand with her friends, she lost her footing and was swept away by the rushing water.
My gosh, people, there's safety railings there for a reason.
This picture wasn't taken by any of her friends. It was taken by a random visitor. I wonder how that couple feels about accidentally
Oh, I can see her. She's on the other side.
Tragic moments. It's the first call on February 20th, 5:59 p.m. Emergency, 911. What's the problem? My mom has passed out. Okay. Where's Mr. Turner at? Right. All right, let me speak to him. She's not gonna talk. Okay, well, I'm gonna send the police over to your house and find out what's going on with you, all right? That was the first call made by a little boy named Robert Turner. And back in February 20th of 2006, he was only 5 years old. He called 911, not for police officers, but for an ambulance. You see, his mother was dying. She had collapsed on the floor, and remarkably, this 5-year-old was smart enough to pick up the phone and call 911.
Let him
now,
cook.
What you just heard was the first 911 call that he made that night. The operator on the other side of the phone was named Sharon Nichols. It was her first call of the night, and for whatever reason, ended the call with Robert. She didn't dispatch any police officers or EMT to the patient. This was really concerning to Robert, so he decided to call again. Emergency, 911. What's the problem? It's my mom. She passed out in her room. Where's the grown-up at? In her room. Let me speak to her before I send the police over there. She's not gonna talk. Huh?
911. My mommy is passed out. Where's the adult located? In the living room. Can I speak to her? I don't know. Hey, do you guys want to ask if you can speak to my great Puritan grandpa? Yeah. You're gonna have to ask to speak to him though. He hasn't really made contact with my family in over a couple hundred years.
She's not gonna talk. Okay, well, you know what? Then she's gonna talk to the police, okay? She's gonna talk to the police because I'm sending them over there. Oh, you know what? I don't care. You shouldn't be playing on the phone. Now, put her on the phone before I send the police out there to knock on the door, and you're gonna be in trouble. That second call was from a 911 operator named Terry Sutton. And before Robert made the decision to call 911 a second time, he had already been sitting next to his mother, nearly lifeless on the ground, for 3 hours. During that time, there was no follow-up calls from the 911 operators, and no police officers or EMT were sent to his house to help his mom. After Terry Sutton hung up on Robert, she reluctantly sent police officers to Robert's location. And once the police arrived, they knocked on the door, and 5-year-old Robert Turner answered it. And at that point, the situation was pretty obvious. Sherelle Turner, Robert's mother, was pronounced dead, and her son was placed in the custody of his relatives.
Oh my God! If I were that mother's parents, I'd sue the shit out of them.
Family would speak to Deliana and Tyrone Patterson about potentially bringing a lawsuit against Terry Sutton.
Oh hell yeah! Bring a freaking lawsuit, sue.
Was quoted saying, "Had somebody even followed up and sent a policeman like they did on the later call, really
she'd be lying.
Robert rather than help his mother, perhaps we wouldn't be here." But no one came at all. Instead, all that happened was that Robert was threatened and really intimidated from doing what his mother had taught him to do, which was to make an emergency call in an emergency situation. When asked about what happened before both phone calls, Robert simply said that his mom just passed out. And when asked about why he decided to call a second time, he simply responded with, "They were taking too long." Once the police discovered Robert's mother on the floor, they immediately called an ambulance. And unfortunately, the most that they could do was escort her body to the morgue. And after an autopsy, it was determined that she had died of a heart attack. This fact.
Uh-oh. Stinky.
Brought up during the lawsuit against the two 911 operators who hung up on Robert, with the argument being that if someone took Robert's pleas seriously, the first time he called, his mother would still be alive. Her death was preventable, and as a result, Robert's family was awarded $1 million.
Good.
The incident even led to an unprecedented conviction of a 911 operator for willful neglect of duty.
Good.
To overhaul the emergency.
I don't hate cops. I'm like a back the blue type person, but that doesn't mean that, you know, some cops shouldn't face punishments.
This is Liam Ashley. He's 17 years old and lives in North Shore City. It's located in Auckland. It's a low-crime, middle-income city in New Zealand. And whilst living with his parents in this normal town, Liam decided to entertain himself by stealing his parents' car. Liam's parents, Ian and Lorraine Ashley, didn't want Ian to think that there wasn't any consequences for his actions. They wanted him to feel the weight of his decisions. So they called the cops, and the police arrested Liam. Ian's parents also denied bail so that their son would be sent to prison with their motivation.
Good job. Good parents teaching their kids a lesson.
To prevent additional future misdemeanors. This was the last straw for his parents. Liam had previous misdemeanors in the past where he would get into minor trouble with the New Zealand law, and his parents believed that the prison system would be the safest place for him. So on August 24th, 2006, Liam was arrested, handcuffed, and taken to the North Shore Jail, where he would be placed in a cell with a 25-year-old man named George Baker. Once Liam was inside, the North Shore police officers decided to use handcuffs to secure both Baker and Liam together in the cell. At this point, Liam was crying. He was intimidated. He was scared. And around the moment where he began to break down is when George Baker awkwardly embraced him to comfort him. Now, it's important to note that Baker and Liam are not alone in the cell. There's one other man named David Olds, whose eyewitness account is incredibly valuable, because without it, what would happen to Liam in the next couple hours would be difficult to understand and put together. David Olds was arrested and transported to the jail around the same time as Liam and George. He was completely dejected. He knew he wasn't leaving the jail for a month because of a burglary charge. So he wasn't actively listening and paying attention to what Liam and George were talking about. But eventually, A conversation caught his ear. George Baker wanted to make an attempt to escape, and their best chance at doing that was during their transport trip to another prison. Liam, feeling intimidated and uncomfortable, decided to flaunt his ego a little bit. He decided to act like he was going to go along with George's plan. That being that they were going to attempt to bust their way out of a police transport van.
How the hell would they do that?
During the entire conversation, one of his initial observations was that he genuinely believed both Liam and George were friends, as if they met and knew each other outside of jail. The way that Liam was telling jokes at George's expense, all while going along with his plan, made it seem like they were genuinely getting along. Time would pass until they would ultimately be escorted to the transport van, David still being largely inattentive, thinking to himself that all of the escape conversation was just talk. Little did he know, George was dead serious. George would begin kicking the ceiling of the transport van, trying to find a loose metal panel. Liam would begin doing the same, and both of their efforts were in vain. That's when George suggested that Liam should fake a seizure so that the guards would have to open the door. Liam flat out refused. So George suggested that he would put him in a sleeper hold instead, and Liam immediately responded with, "Yeah, okay." David would go on to talk about
there's a lot of lapis on this layer.
To agree to this, that Liam
Man,
might
what
have
lapis?
seen
Go to negative
a sleeper
5.
hold on television, and that might have inclined him to believe that it was okay, that it was safe. When asked specifically about what happened next, David was quoted saying, "He was sitting there for ages in the sleeper hold, and George was talking away to him, going, 'Is that all right?' And Liam's going, 'Nah, it's not working. I can still breathe. You gotta go a bit tighter.'" And the last word I remember him saying was tighter. He was totally trusting. And out of nowhere, George snapped. Immediately, George starts tightening the hold more and more and more, all while saying, "You're gonna die." And then at the same time, looking at David and asking him, "Should I kill him?" David quickly responded with, "No, dude, don't kill him. Don't kill him." That's when I started thinking, oh my God, this guy is serious. Liam at this point was actually choking. George was continuing the hold because he believed that Liam was a narc who was responsible for him being in prison. George would then go on to say that he was a King Cobra hitman who got paid big money to kill. It was later revealed that for whatever reason George was arrested that day, the crime just so happened to be committed near Liam's home. And because of that, George believed that Liam knew something about the crime that he committed and was planning to narc on him. Liam was progressively losing more and more consciousness, all while George threatened to stab Liam with a knife that he had in his pocket. This was a threat towards Liam to persuade his family to not give the cops any information on what crimes George had committed. David would specifically say during this moment, "I was up against the wall, freaking out, praying for the chub wagon to just stop and the door to open and to let me out. I thought straight away that the next step is that he's going to pull out his shank and stick me with it." Liam was trapped in the hold for about 15 minutes. His neck was wrenching from side to side, as if George was attempting to break it. And during this entire frightening ordeal, the guards who were driving the truck, who could hear everything that was happening in the back, never turned around to see what was going on. Once the truck stopped at their destination, George let go of Liam. Liam immediately collapsed on the ground, so much so that he fell out of the van. And once George stepped out of the van, he noticed how incapacitated Liam was for being put in a chokehold for 15 minutes and took advantage of it. Whilst Liam was knocked out, George stomped on his head 7 times. And before the guards could subdue him, he had already rubbed Liam's blood all over his chest and face. Whilst being restrained by the prison guards, George had one thing to say. "Get this fella an ambulance. I just killed him." How and why Liam was murdered.
Dude,
wouldn't be known
what
to
an
either the
asshole.
police or Liam's parents. It would take Leopold's coming
Liam, yeah, he did that.
for both Liam's parents
But
and the
dude,
police
that's
to
not
have
what he
some sort of
deserved.
explanation as to why he was violently assaulted.
He did
by
petty
George.
shit, not
George
like
Baker was given a life
death-worthy
sentence
shit.
with a minimum non-parole period of 18 years.
Yeah.
And the Ashley family received some monetary compensation from the corrections department.
Why would you transport that guy at that age with a bunch of adults?
What would you do if you became a millionaire overnight? You wake up
Good
one
question.
morning, you roll over, and the first thing you see is a certified check for $31 million. I'm sure all of us would go on a shopping spree. I know for certain people's bills are going to be paid. Your friends, your family, your loved ones, all of them. They're about to receive gifts that they've never even dreamt of. And it's all because you have it. It's all because you won the lottery. But hey, it's just a fantasy. It's not real. It's a hypothetical. Who would be lucky enough to win a life-changing amount of money like that? This guy. This guy's lucky enough. His name is Billy Bob Harrell Jr. He's a former Marine, and in the mid-1930s, he He ran a print shop located in Humble, Texas, and unfortunately at the time things weren't really going his way. He lost his job of 12 years and was forced to take whatever work was available in his hometown. And up to that point, for the past 3 years, he had been stocking shelves at Home Depot. This man was in dire need of a break, anything to turn his luck around. So it wasn't really a coincidence that he always dreamt of winning the lottery. And on July 28th, 1997, his dream came true. His lucky day finally came when Billy purchased a lottery ticket in the Lotto Texas jackpot. Little did he know that the little scrap of paper in his pocket was worth $31 million. Interestingly enough, he wasn't the first one to find out that he won. He sent his son, Bill, to the store to get a printout of the winning numbers and to make sure the numbers matched his ticket. His son was the first to find out that his dad had just become an instant multi-millionaire. The moment Billy Bob found out that he was a multi-millionaire was the moment that he placed that ticket in a safety deposit box. Then immediately, Billy and his wife secured financial assistance with an experienced finance attorney. Everything was looking up. Billy was doing all of the right things. He placed the ticket in his safety deposit box, he immediately got a finance lawyer, and he made the decision to have his $31 million jackpot be divided into 25 annual installments, which meant for 25 years, he would get $1.24 million. Once all of the proper legal protections and accounting was set up, Billy Bob decided to tithe 10% of his winnings to his local church, and then donating even more money to another church in Colorado. After that, he immediately quit his job at Home Depot and started enjoying the $1.2 million that he was going to get for the next 25 years. The first Christmas that he was a millionaire, Billy Bob decided to splurge, not only on his family, but also on his community. He purchased 480 turkeys for needy families to enjoy during the holiday.
An absolute guy.
You live the high life for a little bit, you spend a little bit, but it's time to preserve what you have left.
Oh, I swear, this guy turns out to be an actual monster.
Snuck up on him, and he began spending more and more of his yearly allotment. Billy began to develop a bit of a complex when it came to his money. He liked the way that he felt when other people saw him spend ridiculous amounts of money day after day after day. He began writing checks to anybody who would ask.
Shit, I already see this going. He's gonna make himself go broke.
Money away. And of course, it wouldn't take long for the community to take advantage of that. Billy was so willing to give away his wealth, many people in the community who didn't even know him would go up to him and ask for money. And he would oblige. This would continue month after month after month to the point that Billy had accumulated thousands upon thousands of dollars of debt. Most of this was attributed to his new girlfriend. You see, unbeknownst to his wife, Billy had taken out tens of thousands of dollars worth of loans to purchase his girlfriend a new car, expensive jewelry, and multiple other expensive luxury goods. And by February 1988, just 8 months after winning the jackpot, his marriage with his wife Barbara was destroyed and over, and quickly after, Billy had to relinquish half of his earnings to his wife. This came at a time where he was deeply in debt. Things would begin to chill out for a little bit until Billy received a phone call from a company called Stone Street Capital. Allegedly, their whole business was meant to help lottery winners renegotiate their deal with the state government. You see, even though Billy was receiving $1.2 million a year, he was so underwater with his debts that yearly payment wasn't covering it. So he wanted access to the rest of his money. Stone Street Capital.
We don't talk about that one.
Him, so he trusted them and began to work with them. And that decision was the final nail in the coffin for everything. Little did Billy know that Stone Street Capital was a scam. It was a completely fake business that consistently scammed lottery winners who were in Billy Bob's position. Lottery winners who were overly leveraged and eager to have access to the rest of their money. Billy would meet up with an attorney from Stone Street Capital, and the attorney offered him a deal under the guise that this was actually a negotiation between him and the state, which would hopefully grant him the ability to have access to the rest of his winnings. The deal was that Billy would immediately receive a lump sum of $2.25 million in cash from Stone Street Capital in exchange for 10 years worth of his lottery winnings, which was equivalent to around $6 million at the time. Whether or not Billy knew this was a terrible deal is unknown. But what is known is that he was absolutely transfixed and poised about receiving $2.5 million from this company that he could use to pay off all of his debts. Billy was absolutely blinded by this offer. His family and friends were telling him just how terrible of a deal this is, how he was basically forfeiting the rest of his winnings for a supposed $2.2 million payout. Even the finance lawyer that he brought on in the beginning told him that this was a terrible idea, specifically pointing out that in Texas, lottery winners could not hand over their lottery installments in exchange for a service, purchase, or loan. But it wasn't enough. Friends, family, and legal counsel could not sway this man. He signed the contract anyway. Stone Street Capital wasted no time. The ink wasn't even dry before Stone Street Capital collected the remainder of Billy's winnings, all $6 million of it. Once his finance lawyer found out about this, he offered Billy one last bit of advice, that he should take a life insurance policy out on himself, that if and when he dies, his family might be able to cover the estate taxes that he had accrued over the past 8 months. Some time would pass, and Billy would become more and more anxious about how he hadn't received his $2.5 million pay.
Actual
During this
scumbags.
time, it would come to his attention that the same company, Stone Street Capital, met up with his wife with the intentions of performing a similar or maybe even the same scam. This worried Billy even more. Those feelings, along with the fact that his bills still haven't been paid and he still hasn't received his money, really made him spiral. He was incredibly depressed and he was feeling very alone.
That sucks. These guys need to be punished.
Ex-wife, asking her if she would be willing to reconcile her feelings about him, and maybe if they could just talk and see if they can work something out. Barbara wasn't interested. She didn't want to be his wife, but she did understand that he was hurting and that maybe he would benefit from a family get-together. They might not ever be married again, but at least they can share a meal with their son, and Billy was fine with that. That same day, on March 22nd, 1999, he went to his wife's house early. She and her son were completely unaware that he had arrived before them, and once they entered the house, they found Billy. He had taken his life. He had pointed a shotgun at his
Poor
heart.
guy.
And he did it all. Barely a month had passed after he had lost all of his money.
Dude, poor guy.
His ex-wife was
He actually sounds like
his son.
that guy actually sounds like a really
It was just 2 sentences.
wholehearted, nice
I just wanted you.
dude.
After the investigators
And we
did their
lost
job,
him.
gathering as much evidence as
Piece
they
of
could,
shit
tried to
scam
understand
company, man.
Why Billy did what he did. His children were looking.
They need
for
to be
proof.
charged with life
They
in
couldn't
prison
believe that
without
their father
parole.
could do this to himself.
Every one of those
All of
scammers.
those theories were put to the wayside.
Piece
The
of
family,
shit
his
scammers.
wife and his son received a tax bill from the federal government requesting hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Like those guys, dude. What I think should happen to those guys, I can't say it on YouTube. Those guys are shitheads. Absolute douchebags. They should be severely punished for making a guy literally off himself. That is scum. That's disgusting, man. Taking advantage of that guy. That's sad. I hate scammers. Scammers are so annoying. Little assholes will ruin your life and they won't even care about it. Heartless bastards they are. My bro literally bought his community turkeys for Thanksgiving. Absolute Giga Chad. It would give money.
After the investigators did their job, why Billy did what he did, his children were looking for deeper answers. They couldn't believe that their father could do this to himself. But all of those theories were put to the wayside when the family, both his wife and his son, received a tax bill from the federal government requesting hundreds of thousands of dollars of back estate tax. They both knew that they couldn't afford it, and that's exactly why they stopped asking questions as to why their father did what he did. Because he couldn't afford it either. Reason being, Stone Street Capital never paid him the $2.5 million. That, on top of all of his debts and all of his reckless spending, completely warped this man's mind. was up.
Okay, Morbid Reality 10 by
The
Alias.
internet is a vast place. Nearly any question that comes to mind can be answered with a simple keystroke. Any curiosity can be quelled with a simple search term. And yet, when we hit enter and look upon the very answer we sought out to find, many of us experience a very peculiar kind of cognitive dissonance. The answer you sought out is grotesque and disturbing. And yet, you can't look away, and you don't know why. It's almost like coming to grips with our morbid reality is a task fit for no one. Do you think you're smart enough to commit a murder? Do you think you have enough intelligence of how to get rid of a body, how to avoid the police, how to evade suspicion? Two men in particular asked these questions,
themselves.
And their names were Leopold and Loeb. Nathan Leopold was born on November 19th, 1904, in Chicago. He was born in the lap of luxury. Both of his parents were incredibly wealthy, and he was also described as a child prodigy. He claimed to have spoken his first words at the age of 4, and by his late teens, he knew 15 languages and spoke 5 fluently.
Damn.
He had earned his bachelor's degree in ornithology at the University of Chicago, and the research that he performed there was nationally recognized. Richard Loeb was born on June 11th, 1905 in Chicago. He was also from a wealthy family and was observed by his teachers to be exceptionally intelligent. So much so that he skipped many grades and became University of Michigan's youngest, at the time, graduate. He was 17 years old. He would then study law at the University of Chicago Law School, and this is where he got the idea to construct the perfect murder. Leopold and Loeb knew each other casually as children, but their friendship didn't bud until they met each other in college. Their relationship flourished in University of Chicago, and they would speak to each other about the things that they were learning. Richard Loeb would command these conversations because he was studying law, and these men had the shared interest of constructing the perfect crime. But on occasion, their conversations would drift to philosophy, and in the book Leopold and Loeb, Trial, written by Douglas O. Linder, he would describe a conversation between Leopold and Loeb that marked the beginning of their plan to kill someone. Leopold was particularly fascinated by Friedrich Nietzsche's concept of supermen, or Übermenschen, interpreting them as transcendent individuals possessing extraordinary and unusual capabilities, whose superior intellects allowed them to rise above the laws and rules that bound the unimportant average populace. Leopold believed that he and Loeb were such individuals, and as such, by his interpretation of Nietzsche's doctrines, they were not bound by any of society's normal ethics or rules. Nearly immediately after Leopold and Loeb had this philosophical awakening, they chose to plan the murder of Bobby Franks. Leopold and Loeb spent 7 months planning everything to the T, from how they're going to dispose the body, how they're going to abduct someone, and even deciding to make a ransom and specific instructions.
Man, ransom, people do ransoms like that,
to make sure that they will never be caught. The pair decided on Bobby Franks because he was from an affluent family as well. They anticipated getting a healthy ransom as a result of this abduction, but they had no intentions of returning Bobby Franks alive. The plan began on May 21st, 1924. Using an automobile that Leopold rented under the name Morton D. Ballard, they offered Franks a ride as soon as he walked home from school. Bobby Franks initially refused. His home was only a few blocks away, so he wouldn't need a car ride. But Loeb persuaded him to enter the car to discuss a tennis racket that they've been using. The precise sequence of events that followed remains in dispute, but major opinion places Leopold behind the wheel while Loeb sat in the back of the seat with a chisel. Loeb then struck Franks with the chisel sitting in front of him in the passenger seat several times in the head, and then dragged him to the back seat where he gagged him, and then he died. The two men then covered the child in hydrochloric acid in order to obfuscate his identity. After that, they sent this ransom note with detailed instructions on how to drop the money and what to do next in order to see their son alive. Ironically, if they hadn't have sent a ransom note, they probably would never have been caught. You see, after the parents received the ransom note, they attempted to follow the instructions, but they were so distressed about their child's abduction that they just did it incorrectly. They went to the drop-off spot and found no one there. It was completely abandoned. They knew that it was a setup. They knew that their child wasn't alive. After the ransom failed, Leopold and Loeb just vanished. But this wouldn't last long. Within the next week, they were both bragging about what they did, saying that they got away with murder.
Idiots.
When they were inevitably approached by police officers, they pointed the finger at each other, and they both received 99 years in prison. Loeb would die 5 years later in a prison murder, with the motive being relatively unknown. Leopold would be released from prison 33 years later and go on to write a book about how his perfect murder failed. hydrogen sulfate, also known as sulfuric acid, is a corrosive chemical known for its ability to oxidize.
You do not F with that stuff.
While sulfuric acid is naturally occurring, its purest form needs to be manufactured, and unfortunately,
it is
that concentrated
evil.
version of sulfuric acid
it will erode and
public,
destroy
and
you.
Becomes available to awful people. This is Mark Van Dongen. His friends describe him as a loving and caring person. One friend in particular described him as a gentle man and everyone's friend. And around 2010, Van Dongen met and began a relationship with this woman. Her name is Berlia Wallace, and they struck up a pretty close relationship. Although Van Dongen was smitten with his new girlfriend, his friends noticed something sinister. You see, Berlia Wallace was 20 years his senior, and a lot of his friends noticed how she was using him. She really didn't care about him. And after 5 years, the relationship began to break down. Van Dongen started noticing her manipulative behavior. Van Dongen chose to end the relationship and began seeing another woman. This enraged Berlia Wallace. She no longer could control him. And as a response to him leaving her, Berlia Wallace goes onto Amazon and purchases a 1-liter bottle of sulfuric acid. She quickly removed the label and researched acid attacks. And from that research, she learned how to...
I'm not gonna say sorry. If you search up how to get away with murder and you're not looking up the show, or you search up how to, like, commit a crime, you're a dumbass, okay? Do you not know that that shit is tracked? That's why I never feel guilty about it. When I laugh in the face of someone who gets caught because they search up how to get away with murder. You dumbass idiot. That's gonna get tracked back to you. Even though we're in America, everything you do and say are to a point pretty much tracked. Like, you're gonna get caught, idiot.
Instantly and swiftly attack her ex-boyfriend. Interestingly, the day that she purchased the acid, Van Dongen called the police and told them that Berlia was stalking and harassing him, along with intimidating his new girlfriend. Unfortunately, Van Dongen still had to share a flat with his ex-girlfriend. This is when Berlia Wallace waited until Van Dongen was asleep. She would creep into his bedroom and throw acid on his face while he slept. The prosecutor had this to say during the court case. You chose your moment for the attack. It occurred when Van Dongen, wearing only boxer shorts, was asleep in the bed which you had shared in your flat. Vulnerable, almost naked, he awoke but had no real opportunity to avoid the focus of your acid attack, namely his face and body. When concentrated sulfuric acid encounters human flesh, it immediately decomposes the proteins and lipids found on your skin, along with leaving an extensive burn, because sulfuric acid, when reacting with organic compounds like flesh, releases a lot of heat. The reaction is instant, and Mark Van Dongen got the brunt of it. He lost sight in his left eye, and the majority of his face is disfigured.
Good, thank goodness. Or not, that came out wrong. I meant to say good he survived, not good he went blind.
Mark Van Dongen,
sorry.
So that he would not be attractive to any other woman. It was an act of pure evil. After doctors were able to stabilize Mark and examine his entire body, they realized that not only his face was attacked with acid, but 25% of his body was attacked with acid. She basically poured the bottle out on him. The doctors and nurses didn't know what had hit them, his father said. They didn't have a suitable ward because of the way that he looked. That caused problems, but he was admitted. They examined him, cleaned him, and we went straight to the palliative care unit. He was given excellent care. I had a beautiful home at the time. I said to Mark, "Come with me." He said, "Dad, that would just be another ceiling to live in." After the trial concluded, Berlia Wallace was sentenced to 12 years in prison. And after the trial, Mark Van Dongen's health began...
No! Give this asshole life! She just damaged a man's body for the rest of his life. He will probably never be able to look the same again. She needs to get life. No. If someone poured acid on me, no, they're getting life in prison. I don't care. Really? At least 50 years in prison? 12 years? Are you joking? No! She assaulted him, not just physically. She poured acid on him. She poured freaking acid on him. She needs to go to prison forever. She does not need to come out of prison. Lock the gate and throw away the key.
Decline, and in Belgium, they allow their patients to choose whether or not they want to be euthanized. Mark chose to be euthanized. He simply didn't want to continue his life in pain.
No.
He chose to euthanize himself on January 2nd, 2017.
Poor guy. No, she needs to go in life. It's not fair that she gets to attack him and then she just gets to go into prison, where she'll basically, although it is hard in prison, she'll be able to get free food for the rest of her life and the ability to stay relatively, to a degree, relatively safe. And then now he just chose to not live anymore. No. That is not how it should work. She caused him to off himself and she gets 12 years. That is some top tier bullshit. My blood is boiling right now. That poor man wanted to just end his own life because of this insufferable asshole's actions. That's sad.
I want you guys to close your eyes
Heart goes out to that man.
In 1960s South Africa. Maybe you're walking down the street of Cape Town and you're thinking of maybe going to the beach, or maybe you're going to see your friends in Pretoria. Who knows? But you're just living your life. But then you encounter this sign. And this is a new sign by the South African Ministry of Justice. It's a new update to apartheid laws. Depending on who you are, these laws may not apply to you. And that was their function. It was to separate you from undesirables, from the native population. This poster, made by the African Ministry of Justice, contained the major rules that an African native would have to follow. It also includes guidelines for British and Afrikaners on how to interact and deal with the native population and colored population, those of mixed race heritage. Anyone disobeying these laws will be imprisoned, fined, and or whipped.
Apartheid.
All Africans over the age of 16 must produce a passbook on demand by a policeman. No white person may have sexual relations with an African, colored, or Indian person, and vice versa. Under no circumstances may an
basically
employer
like
pay
the American
Africans the same rate
civil
as white
movement.
persons, even if they do the same work and work the same hours. No
South
African
Africa
may attend a birthday
had a
party.
whole
The number of
racism
attendees will
from
make the
back
gathering
then.
undesirable. No African may strike for any reason whatsoever. An African in an urban area who is out of work must take work offered to him by the Bureau Affairs Commissioner or be removed from the area. Any African who takes a job outside his town, even if he has lived there for 20 years, must leave that town within 72 hours. No African may buy land or own property anywhere in the Republic. Unless they have obtained a special permit to do so, a white person and a non-white person may not, under any circumstances, drink a cup of tea together in a cafe. Under no circumstances may a
dude,
non-white
heaven
person
forbid
facility
a
set
black
aside
and white
any
person
white
drink
persons
tea
and
together.
no teaching
That would be scary.
These are many apartheid laws that
Big
existed
scary.
during the British occupation of South Africa, and they were all meant to suppress the majority African population.
that just
in that nation.
douchebag laws,
Apartheid
man.
existed for the sole protection of the minority European population in that nation, and without it, the European population were vulnerable to revolution.
Well, maybe they shouldn't have been doing shit that would have made them, the natives, pissed. Just another idea,
In the
you know.
United States, there is approximately 12 million immigrants, 10.7 million of which would be considered illegal immigrants. The term illegal immigrant classifies many different types of document status. Most people who are considered illegal immigrants are those who have overstayed their visa or simply do not have American citizenship. These two individuals are Cuban immigrants. This man's name is Leover Santos Correa. This woman's name is Eldavise Martinez Aguilar. And they're a couple. They wanted to leave Cuba together and enter the United States through Miami, Florida. And typically the way that's done is by employing coyotes, or people smugglers. And these people smugglers take advantage of those who employ them by charging high fees or simply robbing them and leaving them in a desert or in the middle of the ocean. A similar thing occurred with this couple. In 2016, they paid 3 Colombians to smuggle them via boat to Miami, but instead of taking them there, they killed them. Eldavise Martinez Aguilar spent the last minutes of her life being repeatedly assaulted by 2 of them before having her throat slit. The smugglers who killed the couple were named Fredis Valencia Pocios, 30, and Hohen Steven Carizawa Asporia, 23. They were immediately caught after they killed the couple, and they were extradited by the U.S. government back to Cuba. In 2019, they were sent to prison for an unknown amount of time for killing this couple. Do you think you'd ever participate in a mob lynching? Do you think you'd ever be infuriated enough to take justice into your own hands and participate in a lynching with a group of people. In the United States, lynchings were incredibly common during the early 20th century.
That's scary, the fact that people literally brought their kids to a lynching.
Race riots of the late 19th
Can you imagine today hearing about, and like, it doesn't matter, like color of person, like any color of person, and they're like, oh, we're gonna lynch him today. And you're like, okay, let's go bring the kids, you know? Let's go sit down and watch a lynching. Like, that's disturbing. Like, no matter what type of person that is, the fact that people even brought kids to it in the first place is just horrifying. Again, even if it was somehow a criminal on death row, kids shouldn't be able to, or not, shouldn't like have to sit through that. That is disturbing.
States, lynchings were incredibly common during the early 20th century. Unfortunately, they were used against minority groups as a means of oppression. Many race riots of the late 19th century and early 20th century would always culminate in a lynching. Over time, even during the 20th century, lynchings became less and less popular. The publication of images of lynched individuals really stuck in the mind of the American public. People began to question whether or not those who had been lynched were actually guilty of the crimes that they were accused of. It was also hard to ignore that the majority of people being lynched were minorities, majority of those being African Americans. The Ku Klux Klan in particular, a white supremacist group in the United
those
States,
guys are freaking creepy.
African American communities and lynched those who they
even if they weren't white supremacists, they're still creepy. Like the way their robes look just give me a shiver.
Many Ku Klux Klan
like the black and white photos of those dudes actually send me shivers. Dude, if I were alive during their time, I would still be creeped out by them. Even as a white guy myself. Like, they just look creepy. They do. I don't have to say sorry, because those guys are unforgivable a-holes. Assholes. It's scary to a degree to think that they're still around today. Even though they don't hold as much power as they did back then, they still remain in fragments, like very small fragments.
And tried for murder.
Oh,
This is Michael Donald. Born July 24th, 1961, he lived in Mobile, Alabama. He was the youngest of 6 children, and he attended local schools while growing up. After graduating, he would attend a local technical college and study there, all while being employed at the Mobile Press Register, a local newspaper. In the same year, an African-American man named Josephus Anderson was charged with murder of a white policeman in Birmingham, Alabama. The policeman caught Anderson committing an armed robbery, and Anderson reacted by shooting him. Anderson's case was being tried in Mobile, and at a meeting held in Mobile, while the jury was still deliberating, members of the Ku Klux Klan chimed in saying that the reason why Anderson wasn't being convicted is because the jury was predominantly black. Bernie Jack, a high-ranking member of the Ku Klux Klan, had this to say: "If a black man can get away with killing a white man, we ought to be able to get away with killing a black man." The first trial, unfortunately, ended with a deadlock of the mixed white-black jury. Anderson's case was retired and ended in a mistrial. Once the news about the mistrial entered the public, the local Ku Klux Klan had a meeting about how they were going to retaliate. 3 men in particular, named Henry Hayes, his son, and another man named James Llewellyn, got into a car and drove around Mobile looking for a black person to attack in retaliation. They were armed with a gun and equipped with a rope borrowed from Frank Cox, Hayes' brother.
Imagine being attacked because some other guy committed a crime.
Michael Donald.
That
he was
sucks.
walking down the street, coming from a convenience store after purchasing cigarettes. Without any link to the Anderson case or even a past criminal record, Donald was chosen at random for being black.
Dude.
The 2 Klan members lured him over to their car by asking him for directions to a local club and forced Donald into the car at gunpoint. The men then drove out to another county and took him to a secluded area in the woods near Mobile Bay. Michael attempted to escape, knocking away Hayes' gun and trying to run into the woods. The men pursued him, attacked him, and then beat him with a tree limb. This slowed Michael down. They then wrapped a rope around Michael's neck and then pulled it to strangle him while Knowles continued to beat Donald with a tree branch. Once Donald had stopped moving, Hayes slit his throat 3 times to make sure he was dead. The men left Donald's lifeless body hanging from a tree on Henderson Avenue across the street from Hayes' house in Mobile, where it remained until the next morning. The same night, the other Klan members burned a cross on Mobile County's courthouse lawn to celebrate the murder. After the body was discovered the next morning, the local police immediately suspected the Klan. This is because of the remark they made during
And here's the problem about the Klan, is that back then, literally anybody, it could be your friend, the mechanic down the next door, it could be, you know, your You know, it could be your dentist, it could be your policeman, your frickin' mayor could be a Klansman. Like, literally anyone. Like, literally just a wolf in sheep's clothing. No pun intended. At day-night, they were normal, to a certain degree, normal people, but at the nighttime, that all changed.
Thought that it was a drug deal gone wrong. Michael Donald's mother, Belia Mae Donald, insisted that he never had done drugs before and claimed that the police simply just wanted to close the case. She requested the help of a prominent civil rights activist at the time, Jesse Jackson. He was able to convince the FBI to open an investigation, and subsequently, all who were involved in the lynching were caught. It took around 2 years for the entire investigation to be completed, and Henry Francis Hayes was convicted of capital murder. The jury voted in favor of life imprisonment, but the judge overruled the jury's verdict and sentenced Hayes to death. He was incarcerated in the Holman Correctional Facility in Atmore, Alabama, while on death row. Hayes was executed on Yellow Mama, Alabama's infamous electric chair, on June 6, 1997. Once the execution was completed, the Associated Press reported that Hayes was the first execution since 1913 for white on black crime. Hayes is also known as the only Ku Klux Klan member to ever been executed in the 20th century for the murder of an African American. James Llewellyn was indicted by a federal grand jury in 1985 for violating the civil rights of Michael Donald, and pleaded guilty for the civil rights violations in the United States District Court for Southern District of Alabama. Knowles avoided the death penalty by testifying against Hayes, Cox, and other Klansmen at the trial, and he had earlier testified that the slaying was done to show the true strength of the Klan in Alabama.
Ain't like that anymore. Thank goodness.
This is Lina Marcela Medina de Juaro, born on the 23rd of September, 1933.
Okay, I have to stop this video right there for a second. Those tiles, if she lives in Mexico, like, again, I'm not trying to, like, you know, assume anything, but that name sounds, you know, Spanish / Mexican. If she lives in Mexico, looking at that tile behind her, that could be a uranium tile. Quite interesting, actually.
One of 9 children, and at the age of 5, her parents took her to the hospital in Pisco, Peru, due to her stomach and general abdominal region increasing in size at a rapid rate. Doctors originally thought that she had a tumor, but then determined that she was in her 7th month of pregnancy.
Oh, I've heard about this.
This
is actually very disturbing. A 9-year-old gave birth. I'm not saying sorry. Whoever did that is a piece of human shit. That is... I cannot find words to describe how disgusting and vile that action is. A 9-year-old giving birth. And again, you have to realize, whoever the father was needs to literally never see the light of day ever again. That is inhumane, despicable, disgusting.
Once the news got out that a 5-year-old girl was pregnant, many people were interested in the case. Many newspapers and
I'm sorry, 5
petitioned the family
5
exclusive rights to their story.
She probably just brushed into school or started getting into school.
Offers were all rejected, rightfully so, because Lina Medina was 5 years old and was about to give birth to a child. 6 weeks after the diagnosis, Medina gave birth to a boy by cesarean section. She was 5 years, 7 months, and 21 days old, the youngest person in history to give birth. The cesarean birth was necessitated by her small pelvis, and the doctors found out that she had fully mature sexual organs, even though she was only 5. Her baby boy weighed 6 pounds, or 2.7 kilograms, and he was raised.
That is actually tragic. I've heard about this story before, and it's heartbreaking.
She was his mother. And even to this day, the identity of the father is still unknown. Medina's father was suspected of child abuse and was arrested, but there was no evidence that he had abused his daughter.
To that guy out there, rot in hell. Rot in the deepest pit of hell.
By herself, and in 1979, at the age of 40, her son would die from bone marrow disease.
Freaking tragic. That guy is probably burning in hell right now.
In 2018, the city of Baltimore had a homicide rate of 58 people per 100,000. that placed Baltimore in one of the most deadly cities in the United States at that time, and this boy contributed one innocent soul to that rate. His name is Tyrone Harbin, and he's 14 years old, and he is the youngest suspect that the city police has ever charged with murder in the past.
A minor needs committed homicide? Are you joking?
This is Dorothy Mae Neal.
This video is crazy.
There isn't a lot of information on her, but what is known is that she was his neighbor, and Tyrone Harbin chose her to be his victim.
Back on August 29th, she was assaulted inside of her home in the 2300 block of Winchester Street in West Baltimore, and she died the next day, August 30th. What we found in that case was that she had been assaulted, physically assaulted. We also were able to determine after the autopsy that she was also sexually assaulted. And again,
even though it's by a kid, that's still unacceptable.
Our vulnerable population, our older people, especially.
Poor old lady.
Our youth.
She's probably a sweet old thing.
70 years, almost 70 years separate our victim and suspect in this case. The suspect in this case is 14 years old.
I don't care if that's a kid. That is still disgusting.
First degree rape, various sex offenses. We were able to find physical.
Charge him as an. I swear, if he's not charged as an adult, no, he committed
charged with that.
This isn't a funny kid thing though. That this guy needs to be locked up.
Why?
Charge him as an adult.
We charge as an adult. That's the law.
Good. Wait, did he?
That crime. Again, I know that there are some who ask why. We charge as an adult. That's the law. And part of the law is releasing pictures of those who are charged with crimes, and that's our obligation in this. This is certainly not a happy occasion to announce an arrest and a murder. It never is. Obviously good work, but it's sad all the way around because there's some systematic failure in a 14-year-old's life and him to the crime. And he's been charged with
Tyrone
that crime.
Harbin.
Again, I know that there are some who
Harbin
ask
charged
why.
as an adult.
We charge as an adult. That's the law. And part of the law is releasing pictures of those who are charged with crimes, and that's our obligation in this. This is certainly not a happy occasion to announce an arrest.
Good job. You charged him as an adult.
Obviously good.
Good job. Good job. Good job. I don't care. He murdered and R-worded a freaking elderly person. Good job. He deserves prison time. He deserves to be charged as an adult. Disgusting human being. Good job, justice system. You actually did something good for once. Effing W. Let's drink on it. Let's go.
But it's sad all
That's a win.
There's some systematic failure in a 14-year-old.
You know who also needs to face some sort of repercussion? His parents.
Allow us to have to be up here.
How did his parents fail so hard at that's how their kid comes out? I mean, like, I'm not like
Baltimore City, when a child commits egregious crimes.
Yeah, whatever. If he was dumb, but like he's a criminal,
jail sentence be served at a
violent, dangerous criminal.
That privilege was denied to Tyrone Harbin. His charges are unknown because he was a minor when he committed this crime, but it's presumed that he will be in prison for a very, very long time.
He deserves it. He deserves prison.
I truly believe messages, memories, sayings, beliefs are better conveyed on canvas than text or regular speech. Something about an artist's rendition of a specific message or a historical moment adds more insight and depth than a regular piece of text can provide. I can write a 10-page chronological paper about World War II, but this man, Zoran Music, has the talent to convey the same message in an authentic way by depicting what happened during that time. Zoran Music, born on the 12th of February 1909, was a Slovene painter, printmaker, and draughtsman. He was the only painter of Slovene descent who managed to establish himself in elite cultural circles of Italy and France, particularly in Paris in the second half of the 20th century.
His
where he lived most
paintings
of his
are
life.
creepy, and I like
the next
that.
paintings you're going to see are his depictions of the Holocaust, specifically the Dachau concentration camp. When I first encountered his work, I noticed that a lot of his
should probably
paintings
rephrase that. I like
something
creepiness.
negative are smudgy.
But dude, I'm not saying I'm enjoying this. Like, I'm not saying it's a fun thing about the Holocaust.
Especially when he includes
It's a bad
characters
thing.
that are screaming or clawing at their face or lying on
That is
each other.
horrifying,
This
and
image
that's
in
good
particular
that
depicts
is.
a
That needs to be
pile of dead
horrifying.
bodies. These
We need to
bodies
show how bad the
being
Holocaust
prepared
really
for
was.
incineration, and you can hardly discern individual faces, yet you know they're human bodies. They're stiff, stacked on top of each other. Arms, legs, fingers are jutting out randomly. This image in particular has very little detail, but just enough for you to understand what you're looking at. You're looking at depravity. You're looking at tragedy. You're looking at murder. You're looking at innocent people, innocent souls that were snuffed out during the most gruesome and deadliest time in all of human history.
I love it when artists actually put message in their art like that.
Hello everyone, it's your boy
Okay.
Taylor, aka Daddy, and I hope you
Ale
enjoyed
Arrest,
this week's
Morbid Reality
content.
number 12.
I have a whole lot of The internet is a vast place. Nearly any question that comes to mind can be answered with a simple keystroke.
I'm actually gonna do number 13.
The internet is a vast place. Nearly any question that comes to mind can be answered with a simple keystroke. Any curiosity can be quelled with a simple search term. And yet, when we hit enter and look upon the very answer we sought out to find, many of us experience a very peculiar kind of cognitive dissonance. The answer you sought out is grotesque and disturbing. And yet, you can't look away, and you don't know why. It's almost like coming to grips with our morbid reality is a task fit for no one. This is the flag of Latvia. This nation borders Russia and is one of the 3 Baltic states in the region. The nation is sandwiched between Latvia and Estonia. For most of the nation's history, it's been under the thumb of the Russian government, and it's been at war with both Germany, Prussia, and Poland. Much of this nation's
The
history
Soviet
and
Union's
background
harsh
is
gulag
tumultuous,
system.
And I'm going to begin this video with a story about a man who added to that nation's misfortune. This is Herbert Kukers. He was born in the city Liepāja on May 17th, 1900, and at the time of his birth and throughout his childhood, Latvia didn't exist as its own nation. It was under the control of the Russian Empire, and as he grew up, that's all he experienced. Much of his childhood is unknown. What we do know is that when he became an adult, he wanted to pursue a career as a fighter pilot, and throughout his 20s and early 30s, he was able to establish that career. His flying abilities were unmatched compared to his peers, so much so that he was awarded the Harmon Trophy for Latvia in 1933. The Harmon Trophy is an international award given to people
we're
who
not talking
have
about the
displayed outstanding aeronautical ability. And immediately after receiving this award, Herberts became a national hero in Latvia. He was considered the Charles Lindbergh of the Baltic states, especially after he created a wooden aircraft that was able to fly 28,000 miles. He visited Japan, China, Indochina, and India. Soon after he received all of his accolades and the love of his entire nation, Herbert Kukers wanted to further his military career. So he joined the Rajas Commando. This was a National Socialist SS auxiliary police group that was established in Latvia in order to enact horrible things. The occupation of Latvia began in 1941, and the German military and German government didn't waste time trying to take a census on who lives in the nation, whether or not they're an enemy to the German military, or if they can be coaxed and folded into the new German Empire. The Rajas Commando, the organization that Herberts quickly joined, was responsible for carrying out some of the most brutal crimes against humanity in history. The unit's primary function on paper is just to be military police. Their actual role was to eliminate the Jewish population in Latvia. Herbert's Kukurs, with his background in the Latvian military, quickly became a high-ranking official within the unit and had a hand in establishing and planning two awful atrocities. Herbert's Kukurs had the job of managing and liquidating the Riga ghetto. The Riga ghetto housed and imprisoned the majority of the Jewish population that were located in Riga, the major city in Latvia. The forceful relocation of Jews into the ghetto began on October 25th, 1941, and eventually Latvian Jews wouldn't be the only Jews located in the ghetto. German Jews would be deported there, and they would be placed separate from the Latvian Jews into something called the small ghetto. And on November 30th and December 8th of 1941, the Rumbla massacre occurred, when German military officials liquidated the ghetto. And on those 2 days, approximately 35,000 people were executed. And over the course of the war, more and more people would be sent to the Riga ghetto, and more people would be executed. In the book, The Holocaust in Latvia, 1941 through 1945, the Latvian historian Andrew Ezagalis writes that Kukurs played a leading role in the atrocities that were committed in the Riga ghetto in conjunction with the Rumba massacre that occurred on November 30th of 1941. After the war, surviving witnesses of the Rumba massacre reported that Kukurs had been present during the ghetto clearance and fired into the mass of Jewish civilians. According to even more surviving eyewitness accounts, Kukurs was the most recognizable face within the unit responsible for the Rumba massacre. Andrew Ezagalis even notes that the Arajas unit wasn't the only unit present during the Rumba massacre, but the degree they participated in the atrocities in the Riga ghetto were so significant and so devastating that Andrew Ezagalis, after gathering eyewitness accounts and studying the historical and factual accounts of what happened during the Rumba massacre, he concludes that the chief responsibility for said massacre rests on Herbert Kukurs' shoulders. And to remind you, the very people that Herbert Kukurs killed, the very people that Herbert Kukurs massacred, were the same ones celebrating him for receiving the Harmon Trophy and becoming the Charles Lindbergh of their nation.
That guy's a war criminal piece of shit.
Within years of receiving that award and accepting praise from his fellow countrymen, he would turn around.
What a goddamn traitor. People that celebrate you for your military victory, people that have pride in you, and you turn on them. You not only spit in your hand, but cut that off. Despicable. That reminds me of my old micropace. Wow, what a traitor.
His crimes included setting the Riga synagogue on fire, executing over 1,200 Jewish civilians, including infants, by forcing them to stand over a lake until exhaustion, where they would fall in and drown. And those 1,200 executions happened in one massacre. He had also kidnapped,
this guy is actually one of the worst war criminals I've ever seen.
At the Arajas Commando headquarters, and of course, his worst atrocity that was committed on November 30th, 1941, where he ordered other members of the Araja Commando to liquidate the Riga ghetto. He took 28,000 people into a forest near Riga and executed them there. Multiple eyewitness accounts from survivors of that massacre reported that they saw Kukurs snatching infants from the arms of their mothers and executing them on the spot. Like many other high-ranking German officials, after the war, Herbert Kukurs fled to South America, specifically Brazil. The Brazilian consulate in Rossel issued a visa for permanent residency for Kukurs on December 18th, 1945. Unfortunately, the visa did not list the name of the Latvian Jewish woman Kukurs kidnapped and pretended was his wife, but it did identify the 3 minor children that was accompanying him. Once in Brazil, Kukurs established a business in Sao Paulo, flying a Republic RC-3 Seabees on scenic flights. And whilst he was running this business and living his life in South America, he never attempted to hide his identity. Neither shame nor guilt motivated him to move to South America. His motivation...
That guy, again, I have to say this, I say that on the other person, that guy's not a human.
He remained in South America for over a decade. And his business...
Like, no human could do that. Whatever was in him died the day he joined the SS. That guy is like, again, I know YouTube sounds... I know YouTube told me like, oh my god, it's probably harsh. No, that guy's human trash. Like, he literally committed genocide. That guy is trash. And I'm not sorry for saying it. It needs to be said. That guy is a horrible
relatively successful,
human being.
and that success didn't go unnoticed. He would be reached out to by a company interested in purchasing his business. They persuaded him to have a meeting in Uruguay. This is where Herbert's met a businessman named Anton Kunzel, and he was incredibly poised to meet Herbert, but not for the reasons that you think. You see, this whole business meeting was a sham, and the man that Herberts was speaking to wasn't named Anton. His name was Yaakov Midai, and he was an agent of the Israeli Mossad, an organization tasked with the killing of fugitive Nazi war criminals, and Herbert Kukurs had fallen right into their trap. Yaakov would ultimately coax Herbert into a home that he and other Mossad agents owned. Herbert was under the impression that they were going to still talk money. He was sorely mistaken. Herbert's Kukurs would quickly be tackled and subdued. Herbert's was in his 60s by now, but he still was strong enough to fight violently against his attackers. At one point, Kukurs bit the finger of one of the hitmen so hard it nearly severed. Ultimately, however, Kukurs was overwhelmed. He was subdued after one of the men hit him in the head with a hammer.
Karma's gonna be a bitch here now, ain't it?
Pleading with the men to let him speak before they did anything else. He got no response and was promptly shot in the head twice with a suppressed automatic pistol, killing him instantly.
That's
Kukurs'
karma.
body was found in a trunk on March 6th, 1965. There were...
Again, before anybody's like, oh my god, you're wishing death. This, you know what? This guy killed like 20, 30,000 people. Not soldiers, not, you know, enemies of war. Actually, yeah, enemies of war. But he killed civilians out of hate for just nothing. Nothing but hate. That's it. That's karma biting him back in the ass. I don't feel any guilt about that. That's what he had it coming.
Got no response and was promptly shot in the head twice. The men hit it.
What's this guy's name?
He still was strong enough to fight under the impression that they were going to still talk money. He was sorely mistaken. Herbert's Kukurs would quickly be tackled and subdued. Herbert's was in his 60s by now, but he still was strong enough to fight violently against his attackers. At one point, Kukurs bit the finger of one of the hitmen so hard.
Damn. Yeah, that's karma biting that guy right in the ass. He had it coming. Targets. Jews. Yeah, that's not a good look for him. How many people did this guy kill? Like, how many innocent people? He murdered at least 30,000 of his own people. He once had a 1,500 victims forced into a lake and drowned. Yeah, that guy deserved it. Nazi scum. Like, that guy actually might be one of the worst people, like worst like dictator leaders. Like, we're not talking like dictators, like leaders in history, like excluding like Hitler, Hussein, freaking, you know, all these and like Mussolini, all these like really bad dictators. This guy, like of army generals, this guy might be the actual worst people, or one of the worst human beings I think I've ever heard. Not only did he kill innocent people, he killed his own people, like an actual traitor. Dude is an actual traitor, and not just or normal people, people that actually like praised him, people that loved him, people that celebrated him, and he turned his back and not only spit in their hand, but killed them all. Damn, that is another I've seen evil in this world, but that guy is definitely one of the most biggest epitomes of evil I've ever seen. That guy is not a human. I know I've said so much, but that guy is not a human. Like, that is insane how there's just no sympathy, no humanity, just nothing, but except for burning, raging hate. Burning, raging, want to kill. Not just people, not like soldiers. Yeah, it sucks, but that's war, and it's somewhat gettable. Like innocents. He killed innocents. Yeah, I don't feel bad for him. I mean, he literally joined a Nazi death party. He had it coming.
This is Lake Victoria.
What a
it's
traitor.
The biggest of the African Great Lakes, with a surface area of approximately 23,146 square miles. It's the world's largest tropical lake and the world's second largest freshwater lake by surface area after Lake Superior in North America. And unfortunately, on July 11th of this year,
the Great Lake. I always forgot. I can never remember the Great Lakes.
A passenger plane with 43 people on board crashed into Tanzania's Lake Victoria on Sunday before landing in the northwestern town of Bukoba.
Yeah.
The accident is being blamed on bad weather. Rescuers worked to recover survivors and lift the plane out of the water using cables and cranes. It is true that there's been an accident in Kagera province, he says, and everything is under control as all rescues and safety equipment have been deployed to help out. We've managed to save quite a number of people, and we will give a brief statement after we finish with our rescue efforts.
The French-Italian-built ATR-42 plane was operated by Precision Air, which is Tanzania's largest private airline and is partly owned by Kenya Airways and primarily offers flights to tourist destinations. And on July 11th, 2022, during a typical flight from Dar es Salaam to Bukoba, a town on the shores of the lake, the plane suddenly fell out the sky and collided into the lake. The aircraft was approximately 100 meters in the
Engine
air
failure or something?
and began to malfunction. The pilot went on to say that it was bad weather that caused the plane to fall out the sky, but as of right now, the reason is unknown. 43 people, including 39 passengers, and 2 pilots and 2 crew members were on the flight. And when the plane collided into the lake, this is what the plane looked like after they fished it out of the lake. The entire front of the plane is nearly ripped off, and when the plane collided with the lake, it immediately started taking on water, threatening the lives of everyone inside. The police commander at the scene of the crash mentioned that they were able to save a vast majority of the people, but fatalities are unknown. At least 26 people have been rescued and evacuated to a hospital. The rest,
They
their
saved
conditions
people.
are unknown.
Oh wait, maybe I'm just thinking that's middle of nowhere.
This is Eto'o. It's a
That's
collection of
Eto'o.
40 islands with a total land
And
area
it says
of
44. Yep, that's not a good
kilometers,
sign.
2.26 square miles. And it was the location of the Battle of Eto'o. This
Oh.
island battle was the epicenter of the Pacific Campaign during World War II.
That was gonna be
The battle
nuked.
was fought between the 17th
I
of
had it all
February
wrong.
1944 and the 23rd of February 1944. The Japanese Empire stationed around 2,300 men on the island with the intention of using that island as a base for the Japanese Empire to regain lost islands that were captured by the Americans in the Pacific. And the invasion of Eto'o directly followed the success in the Battle of Kalawajin in the Southeast Pacific. To capture Eto'o would provide an airfield and a harbor to support attacks on the Mariana Islands to the northwest. The operation was officially known as Operation Catchpole, and it was a 3-phase operation involving the invasion of 3 main islands in the Eto'o Atoll. This is Marine Corps Private Theodore James Miller. He was assigned to the 22nd Marine Independent Regiment, and
His
soon
face
after,
looks
he was given
broken,
orders to
my
board
lord.
the USS Arthur Middleton. This attack transport ship was scheduled to arrive at Eto'o Atoll, specifically Engby Island, one of the 40 islands that make up the atoll. In the attack on Engby Island, American losses were 78 killed, 166 wounded, and 7 missing. totaling 251 casualties. All of Engi's defenders were killed, except for 19 Japanese prisoners that were taken in. Although Miller survived, a month later he would be sent to Ebon Atoll in the Pacific, and he was killed during its invasion. Miller was able to take on 25 Japanese soldiers, including 6 civilians, 2 women, and 2 children among them. He was able to put up a 20-minute firefight before he and another Marine were found dead.
And
this photo of James Miller was
rest in
widely
peace,
distributed
dude.
in the United States after Miller's death. It was one of the few photos
that's one
that
thing
were
I
publicly
respect.
shared that depicted
Is
trauma
people that don't
as
just
caused.
die and sit down. No, they fight. They make sure when they die that they're gonna go out
He's simply not present.
like a freaking hero. Rest in peace, brother.
This is Salma Bashir, and for over 10 years of her life, she has not been able to eat. When Salma was 5 years old, her family decided to take a quick...
I think I might know. I feel like I might have heard about this girl. Her stomach had a problem. I don't think she even has a stomach. It just goes straight down.
...to Egypt, and during that trip, they decided to spend some time at a pool. And because Salma was 5 years old, she needed to be in the baby pool. At the time, her mother was pregnant, and Salma had an older brother who was also in the pool.
Oh no. This girl is about to suffer Delta P. Delta P is basically Delta me. Oh, look at that tree. Damn, that's a big ass tree. Delta P, or the differential in pressure, refers to a phenomena where water wants to flow to an area with low pressure, with the least resistance. Take 2 tanks. One with it's full, and the other is empty, and you connect a pipe with a valve. Open that valve, the water from the big tank is gonna flow in and immediately start flooding. And when this happens, it's gonna create suction. And basically, when you get caught, you're cooked. There's a saying of Delta P: when it's gotcha, it's gotcha. And this girl, I think, unfortunately suffers Delta P. Delta P sucks. No pun intended. It's bad.
Salma, and watching her play in the pool, something terrible happened. Salma ended up accidentally sitting on the pool's suction valve, and the force was so strong that it tore her intestines from her body before anyone had a chance to pull her away. When asked to recall about this experience, Salma had this to say: "I was just swimming all of a sudden. I just sat on it by accident. I know the lifeguard...
Not trying to be funny, man, but when Delta P,
suction was so much,
when it's
my
gotcha,
dad pulled me out, and then I know a couple of people finally were able to get me out.
It's gotcha.
And when I was taken out, it was so traumatic. When Salma's mom came to see what was going on, she was initially confused. Her daughter was screaming in pain, and she couldn't identify what was wrong. The reason being is that Salma was wearing a red swimsuit, and her intestines just looked like torn swimsuit to her mother. When asked about her reaction to Salma's injury, this is what her mother had to say: "I found someone carrying her, and all her intestines came out of her body. I couldn't believe that it was intestine. I thought at the beginning it was her swimsuit. After frantically taking her to the nearest hospital, doctors just gave her weeks to live. Fortunately, though, Salma was given the opportunity to have a life-saving surgery after her parents crowdfunded £236,000 and waiting over half a year to get a transplant.
Bless the people who actually
being a success, her body rejected the transplant intestine, and after 6 grueling months, it had to be removed. At the age of 5, she had an open wound on her stomach. It took a long time for that to heal, and she had to dress that wound every single day. Salma was quoted saying, "My stomach was open so bad, we could literally see my insides. It's healing slowly."
She has a smile on her face. Absolute kiddo right there.
So thankfully, you can't really see insides or anything, but it's leaking 24/7. To make her feel comfortable, her parents removed her from school and are now homeschooling her. Since the age of 5, she's needed a wheelchair to get around, and it's
what a
rare
kiddo.
she goes a month without needing
the fact she can smile after a traumatic event like that is just goes to show you how strong she is. Keep fighting, little kiddo.
To maintain her health, and how major costs could be negated.
Let no disability keep you out.
To be a doctor in the United States. She's a qualified doctor in her home nation, but that qualification didn't transfer to the United States. As of right now, at the age of 15, Salma requires a transplant. She would need to have 5 organs replaced. small intestines, large intestines, liver, stomach, and pancreas. And these organ transplants are expensive. Without insurance, 5 organ transplants cost $3 million.
Jesus.
In the meantime, Salma has done a great job of trying to maintain some normalcy in her life. She doesn't want her condition to affect her happiness.
That is good spirit right there.
Become available to her.
I respect that.
A total parental nutrition bag.
I would be crippling. I'd be depressed for the rest of my life.
Nutrients. Her bag typically contains a mixture of sodium, glucose, calcium, and other miscellaneous nutrients that a growing child needs. What do you think happens when you lose control of your car and run it into a house? You might think that's a silly question, because we've all seen a car run into a building. It's a staple in every action movie. I'm sure we all can picture it. So let me ask you a better question. Is what you're currently picturing this November 8th, 2022? 2 people were killed after a car crashed into a home in Park Ridge, Chicago, Tuesday morning.
It's Chicago, I'm not surprised.
From their homes
not sure you call this dude, I'm not surprised.
Like something out of a movie. They also noted that those who were in the car during the crash died instantly.
Yeah, I'm about to say, there's no way they survived that.
Allegedly, the driver was tearing through the entire neighborhood, cutting through intersection after intersection before completely losing control and plowing into this house. And the only silver lining is that no one was actually living in the house. It had been vacant for a year. I've never seen a car so completely totaled and wedged in a building before.
I mean, look, yeah, you are right. That car is like...
It's raw. It's visceral. This isn't a movie. This is a TV show. 2 lives were lost. And I can guarantee you, by the way that this car looks, it wasn't an instant death. Whoever these people were, they were suffering. And whether or not they're... really isn't any information on whether or not they were inebriated or maybe their car was malfunctioning. Either way, a bunch of people on that street woke up at 11 a.m. to a crash.
Oh yes, Diamonds. At least no one else was hurt. So what pissed me off is that,
according to the United States Department of
people drunk drive and then they'll hurt others.
People in the United States die in drunk driving crashes. That's 1 person every 45 minutes. In the year 2020, 11,654 people died while driving impaired on alcohol. And unfortunately, this is a 14%.
People need to put down the frickin' bottle and put their hands in the steering wheel.
Nearly a majority of these deaths are people who weren't drunk at all. People who were simply driving.
That actually pisses me off.
Someone on the street was struck by the
Imagine just being an innocent bystander being killed by a drunk driver.
She was born on November 28th, 1986 in Louisville, Kentucky. Her home life is relatively unknown. Multiple articles that talk about her infer that maybe she grew up in an impoverished household because of the career path that she decided to go down in her early 20s. Cody Lane is an adult film star, and a pretty prominent one. Between the years of 2006 and 2013, she starred 180 movies and was paid $300,000 over the course of her career. After 2013, Cody Lane decided to pursue a career in the escort industry, and since she was a minor celebrity, she would charge you $1,800 an hour for a date, and this was relatively lucrative for her. She was able to support her husband and the child that they share. Many articles that talk about the life of Cody Lane consistently mention how much she treasures her family, how much she loves her husband, and how much she loves her son. Unfortunately though, on December 16th, 2020, Cody Lane was innocently walking home on a sidewalk. While she was crossing the road, a reckless drunk driver hit her. Cody ended up flying and sprawled onto the ground with blood gushing out from her wounds. She was immediately rushed to the hospital, and doctors immediately observed that her condition was critical. And unfortunately, it was just too much for her to bear. On January 9th,
just minding your own business, and
she passed
some
away.
idiot drunk driver comes out of nowhere and kills her.
Entertainment industry. It was such a shock that the first ever articles written about Cody Lane after 2013 were articles about her death. She's currently only survived by her husband and son. And the drunk driver that took Cody Lane's life, his whereabouts are unknown, but the decision he made that night is known. It was a decision that led to an innocent woman dying in the world's worst way. Ventura County, California, with a population of 843,843, is located west of Los Angeles and is known for the fact that it's one of the few places in the United States where you can legally grow cannabis. The county is also known for its low crime rates and above average population of younger people.
You don't say!
Clubs scattered throughout the county. But there is one bar in particular that is pretty infamous. It's called the Borderline Bar and Grill, and that night they had a promotion. They were hosting line dancing lessons for college students as young as 18. Crowds of young people packed into the bar. Two groups in particular were celebrating their 21st birthdays, and everything was going fine for a little bit, until people started hearing gunfire. During the event, a former U.S. Marine machine gunner who may have suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder suddenly burst into the bar, tossed a smoke bomb into the crowd, and started opening fire randomly into the bar. There was nearly a crush at the door, with people attempting to escape the building before being injured or killed. Terrified patrons were running out into the street, covering their heads as bullets flew. Immediately after the gunfire, those who were outside of the bar noticed and observed people running out with their phones, calling their loved ones, texting their loved ones. It was pure chaos, on top of the fact that people were calling 911 and nearly jamming up the line because so many calls were being made in such a short period of time. But for as quickly as it began, it stopped. The shooting left 12 people dead and 18 others injured.
Damn.
Some were hurt trying to escape,
people?
and the severity of their injuries were not immediately known. Once police officers arrived on the scene and were able to control the crowd and enter the bar safely, they noticed that the suspected gunman, Ian David Long, was already dead. Initially, the police officers didn't know how David Long died. There was so much blood on the floor, they couldn't determine where it came from. They didn't know if it was a self-inflicted gunshot wound or if another police officer was able to get him by firing through the bar from the outside. Once police officers were sure that the threat was handled, multiple local news organizations converged on the scene. They quickly interviewed as many people as they could. One person in particular, named Nellie Wong, was able to give her account to the Los Angeles Times. She was celebrating her 21st birthday at the bar, and as the shooting started, she immediately dived to the floor and hid behind a group of tables and bar stools, squeezing her nose closed with her hand to avoid choking on the smoke. "I immediately stopped moving, stopped breathing," said Wong, who still wore a bright pink cowboy hat and a happy birthday sash. "Thank goodness he didn't see me at all." It wouldn't take long for police officers and detectives to figure out the gunman's background. Ian Long was 28 years old, and he lived in Newbury Park, 5 miles away from the dance hall, and he drove his mother's red Toyota pickup to the borderline and didn't say anything before opening fire. Long had an extensive background as a machine gunner in the U.S. Marine Corps, reaching the rank of corporal. He served a 7-month tour in Afghanistan during his nearly 5 years in the service, and once he completed his 5 years, his neighbors noted a change in his demeanor and suspected that he had emotional problems. It's important to note that Ian was already on the police department's radar. Deputies were called to Long's home in April of 2018 to respond to a complaint made by a neighbor, the complaint being that he was irate and acting irrationally. But the mental health workers that were dispatched with the deputies said that he did not meet the standard for an emergency psychiatric hold. There was no clear motive for the shooting, but there is a reason. Ian was incredibly mentally ill, suffering with PTSD and potentially schizophrenia, and for whatever reason, triggered by his severe mental illness, Ian decided to kill 12 innocent people, 2 of which are pictured in this photo. Telemachus Orphanos, who's pictured with the black beanie in the back, lifting a beer, and Brandon Kelly, who's also in the back of the photo and wearing a cap, were murdered by Ian Long that night. And this photo was taken moments before Ian decided to kick in the door, throw in a smoke bomb, and shoot 12 random people. After a month, the entire scene was broken down. Detectives and deputies were able to establish every single movement that Ian Long made that night, and the analysis begins with the photo. It was taken 7 minutes before Ian walked into the building and started firing. Immediately after the firing began, 7 people hid in the attic, 7 people hid in the kitchen bathroom, and others shattered windows to escape. Officers found Long's body in the office, and he died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. That night, 75 people did survive, either by hiding or simply escaping through the windows. The shooting could have been a lot worse, because apparently there was 175 people packed into the bar.
Damn.
So it's almost a miracle that a majority of people were at the bar that night, who had their lives threatened, were able to escape and survive. But unfortunately, this isn't the end of the story. The 2 men who died, who are shown in this photograph, were actually involved in a different shooting. The infamous Las Vegas shooting in 2017. They both survived that by escaping or hiding, and they both shared the same tattoo commemorating the fact that they survived. And if you look at Brandon Kelly's left arm, you can partially see their shared tattoo. A tattoo that was captured in a picture that was taken only 7 minutes before another masked gunman came in and took their
That
lives.
is wild. Excuse me.
The observable universe is approximately 93 billion light years in diameter, and within the observable universe, there's about 100 to 200 billion galaxies. And when it comes to planets, there's 10 to the 30 that fit within those 93 billion light years. I think it's safe to say that there has to be other living organisms in the universe. We can't be alone. But it's still a privilege to have the ability to create sentient, conscious life. And ironically, that life is incredibly improbable. You and I share a similar probability of being here. 1 in 4 quadrillion. That's the probability of a sperm meeting the right egg. And with that being said, with you understanding just how special and improbable
That is,
you are,
and how
much
special it is
privilege
that
it is to be here,
Earth
to share
exists
experience,
to support
and
us.
also have the opportunity to create another life. Let's talk about this couple. Their names are Taylor Blaha, 24, and Brendan Toma.
I feel like I've
31.
seen these
And I'm going
guys.
to tell you the story of not only how they squandered their lives, but how they destroyed another's life. On November 16th of this year, Taylor Blaha gave birth to a little girl. Unfortunately, Taylor wasn't prepared to be a parent. She was willing to give the child up to a social worker, and she was on the phone that day with one. But then suddenly, plans changed. Taylor quickly hung up the phone with the human resources worker because her baby girl began to cry. This was a problem for Taylor and Brandon because they were habitual meth users, and they didn't want anybody to call the cops about a crying baby because they don't want the cop to discover the fact that they're high on meth and that their child, their newborn little girl, was exposed to methamphetamine as well, most likely during pregnancy.
Poor
Taylor was
girl.
afraid that she would lose her child.
You
along
should
with
be
her
afraid. You should
son
lose your
because of her
child.
drug use and their exposure
Not
to
in death, but
illegal drugs.
the child should be
and Taylor
taken away.
decided to
She
drown
shouldn't
the
be
baby in the bathtub.
raised with
And
people
this
that
act
do
of
meth.
violence was moments after the child was born. The child was barely alive for a few hours. And they did this to make sure that the police won't come over and ask any questions about their meth use or why their child, their 2-year-old son, was exposed to illegal drugs. Strangely enough, after the gruesome murder of their newborn daughter, the couple decided to keep portions of her umbilical cord in a drawer as a keepsake. After Brandon made sure that the
That's
child was
disgusting.
deceased, he started planning on how to dispose of the body. He first placed the newborn in a plastic container and then wrapped that container in multiple plastic bags, and finally stuffing all of that into a black backpack. Brandon chose to not immediately leave the apartment with the body. Instead, he placed everything into the backpack and put the backpack somewhere in the apartment and just left the body there for a little bit. Hours would pass. And during that time, Brandon decided to dispatch the body outside of the apartment. While texting his girlfriend, he told her that he would dispose of the body in some woods outside of the town near a bridge named Kenyon Road Bridge. And this was an interesting decision because that bridge is known to all of those who lived in Fort Dodge, Iowa, where this crime took place. It's a small town, which means everyone, from normal civilians all the way to police officers, will have an easy time finding this baby. And when Taylor started to feel guilty about what she did and turned herself in, the police were immediately searching the woods near the bridge, just like the text messages said. But unfortunately, the baby was not found. Detectives tried to pull out any additional information out of Brandon during the interview process, but that didn't work out. Taylor, on the other hand, was the first to come to the police, and she had a lot to say about her feelings concerning her daughter. She told investigators that she did not intend to keep the baby and planned on allowing her sister to adopt the child. But this wasn't true. Once the police department analyzed her and her boyfriend's phones, there were evidence of multiple different searches for how to miscarry a baby. This confused both the police officers and the news organizations covering the story. How can this couple be so adamant about not wanting to have a child to such an extent that they're searching up ways to have a miscarriage, but at the same time, they're fearful that their child would be taken away by government officials if they were to find out that both of them were strung out on meth? And that there was the primary motivation to kill their child. There hasn't been a trial yet, but both of them are being charged with first-degree murder in the death of their newborn daughter. But recently, Thomas received an additional charge for abuse of a corpse. Both Brandon and Taylor are currently being held in the Webster County Jail on cash-only bonds. Brandon's bail is set at $1,050,000, and Taylor's bail is set at $1 million. Bruskina. She was born in Belarus in 1924 and lived most of her life with her mother in Minsk. As a child, both her mother and teachers acknowledged that she was an avid reader and a quick learner. Over time, she would get familiar with the Communist Manifesto and align herself with that ideology. She would soon join the Vladimir Lenin All-Union Pioneer Organization. Over time, the organization would change its name to the Young Pioneers, and it was a mass youth organization of the Soviet Union for children and adolescents aged between 9 and 14 that existed between 1922 and 1991. The organization functioned a lot like scouting organizations do in the West, like the Boy Scouts of America and the Girl Scouts of America, and Marcia enjoyed it as a child, eventually going on to join the Commissol, which is a similar Leninist youth organization, but instead of teaching children skills, it taught children how to become a potential member of the Communist Party. Her ambition didn't go unnoticed. In December of 1938, the newspaper Pioneer of Belarus published a photograph of Masha with the caption, "Masha Bruskina, the schoolgirl of 8th grade in school number 28, Minsk. She only has good and excellent marks in all subjects." For the remainder of her childhood and through her teenage years, she leaned into her studies and ultimately graduated from Minsk Secondary School in 1941. Over time, she developed an interest in becoming a nurse, so she began to volunteer at the hospital at the Minsk Polytechnic Institute, which had been set up to care for wounded soldiers of the Red Army. During her time at the hospital, she helped Red soldiers escape by smuggling civilian clothing and false identity papers into the hospital. A patient told the Germans what Bruskina was doing, and she was arrested on October 14th, 1941. She would be transferred between the German 707th Infantry Division to the Lithuanian Auxiliary Troops, and after being placed in their custody, Marcia began writing a letter to her mother. The letter was penned on October 20th, 1941. "I am tormented by the thought that I have caused you great worry. Don't worry, nothing bad has happened to me. I swear to you that you will have no further unpleasantness because of me. If you can, please send me my dress, my green blouse, and white socks. I want to be dressed decently when I leave here." Some time passes after Marcia sent her letter to her mom. At this point, German officials are contemplating on what to do with her. They decided on an execution, a public execution. They wanted to make an example out of Marcia.
Wait, I think I heard about
other
this.
members of the resistance, a 16-year-old named Voldia and a World War I veteran named Kirill. Before being hanged, she was paraded through the streets with a placard around her neck, which read in both Russian and German, "We are partisans, and we have shot at German troops." That statement wasn't true, but it didn't matter. This was a show of power. It was
I think I saw this girl.
But that's not what happened. On Sunday, October 26, 1941, Marcia was hanged publicly. And at that very moment, she became a martyr. There were many witnesses to the execution. One eyewitness account in particular was recorded. When they put her on the stool, the girl turned her face towards the fence. The executioners wanted her to stand with her face towards the crowd, but she turned away. And that was that. No matter how much they pushed her and tried to turn her, she remained standing with her back to the crowd. Only then did they kick away the stool from under her. For decades after the war, Bruskina was officially referred to as the Unknown Girl, allegedly due to anti-Semitism from Soviet authorities. Up to 2009, Marcia's name was not present at the memorial plaque where many members of the resistance were executed. But once people realized her name was absent, by the end of the year, they added it to the plaque. An additional monument for Bruskina was erected in Israel, and a street was named after her in Jerusalem.
I think there's this one girl who was like, I think roughly her age, and she was trying to fight the Nazi regime. And they captured her, and they wanted to hang her and take a picture to make sure that it would strike fear. And they're like, what are your last words? And she said to this like actual SS dude, "We will not stop fighting until you evildoers are defeated one by one." Or something along the lines of that were her last words. Didn't even give a shit. Actual bravery.
Hello everyone, it's your boy, Ailerus, and I hope you enjoy.
Ailerus, number 27.
It is a vast place. Nearly any question that comes to mind can be answered with a simple keystroke. Any curiosity can be quelled with a simple search term. And yet, when we hit enter and look upon the very answer we sought out to find, many of us experience a very peculiar kind of cognitive dissonance. The answer you sought out is grotesque and disturbing.
Yay, diamonds.
And yet,
I'm doing a lot of this deep slate mining for my sister, but I really want the diamond byproduct I can get from it.
Reality is a task fit for no one. located on the island of Honshu, is an active stratovolcano known as Mount Fuji. With a summit elevation of 3,764 meters, or 12,000 feet, it's the tallest mountain in Japan and the second highest volcano located on an island in Asia. And for millennia, this stratovolcano has gone on to maintain a very positive reputation. Whether it be cultural or spiritual, Mount Fuji has meant a lot to the Japanese people, with records of their adoration going back generations. To quote the historian H. Brian Earhart, in medieval times, Mount Fuji came to be seen as the #1 mountain in the known world, at least in a Japanese context, back in 1600. The known world to them was China, India, and Japan, and they believed, rightfully so, that their mountain would be the greatest in their region of the world. In present day, Mount Fuji still maintains much of that spiritual and cultural reputation, but now, like many other natural wonders of the world, it is seen as a tourist destination, a place to go hike. And to begin today's video, I'm going to share with you a story of a hiker, a Japanese man who chose to share his adventure climbing this very prominent mountain.
Oh, the streamer who died on Mount Fuji. He streamed his live stream. He fell off and died.
That stream was hosted on r/livestreamfails, a subreddit dedicated to all things live streaming that could be considered funny, cringy, or in this circumstance, unsettling. This is Tetsu Shinohara. Online, he would be known as Tetsu, and he would consistently stream on YouTube. And on October 28th, 2019, he decided to climb Mount Fuji with the intent to share.
How the hell is he streaming on Mount Fuji?
Now,
how did he get internet up there or sell it?
Especially Mount Fuji. He had done it multiple times before, especially the year prior in 2018. Many speculate that his frequent hiking of this mountain gave him a sense of assurance or confidence when it came to his climbing abilities. And this supposed confidence may have encouraged him to stream this entire event, with the thought being that he would be able to show off his hiking prowess. And before we jump into the stream, it's important to acknowledge that climbing or hiking Mount Fuji is only permitted during the summertime. That's when the snow melts and all the trails are open. Hiking outside of this time is incredibly prohibited because of the nature and geography of a stratovolcano. During winter, the pinnacle is covered in snow, and hiking during that time is incredibly dangerous. Tetsu was very aware of this and made this an aspect of his stream, with the title of his stream literally being "Let's Go to Snowy Mount Fuji," and many sources point that to being why he decided to actually stream. It was supposed to be sensational. To see a 47-year-old man attempt to hike a snowy, active stratovolcano would absolutely encourage people to, well, tune into his stream. And that's what people did. A lot of people. The stream itself is over an hour long, and much of it is innocuous. It's just him walking up a partially cleared hiking path. The sky was clear, and the presence of other hikers was sparse, to say the least. And as Tetsu climbed the mountain, the sky would become a little less clear. You would begin to see clouds and even larger piles of snow, indicating that he had reached a high altitude. But this would be at the middle of the stream. There would still be a ton of the mountain left to hike. And of course, throughout the entire stream, he would say that he was rushing to the peak, along with statements saying that he should have brought a bigger hot pack because his fingers were becoming cold. It would take around 2/3 of this hour-long stream for you to really see just how challenging it is to climb Mount Fuji during the wintertime. The slope of the mountain continues to get steeper as you climb it, and his boots were no longer touching the ground. He was treading upon snow at this point. He would even acknowledge and assert that the trail that he was taking was getting more slippery and more dangerous. He would go on to say that he was trying to walk by the rocks, and it was all steep downhill. He noticed that if he lost his footing, he would be falling off the side of the mountain. So he tried his best to be as careful as possible, all while reacting to live chat messages that would occasionally go across the stream. And near the tail end of the stream, and in moments after he notices just how precarious his situation is, he slips.
Cooked. Yup.
Concerned viewers who witnessed the fall online notified local authorities about the incident. A search team would be dispatched to rescue him, because at this moment he was sliding down the mountain, and for every second that he was, his comatose body would be hitting ice and rocks. The Shizuoka Prefectural Police press officer said that 2 districts were straddled by Mount Fuji, and they were searching for the fallen climber after receiving frantic calls from all of Tetsu's fans who unfortunately saw him fall off of a mountain live. It would take a couple of days until they
that must have been horrifying.
Police were still working to identify the corpse,
their hearts
which
have
was difficult given the circumstances in which he fell down the mountain. His body was most likely heavily damaged or stuck in a location that was hard to access. His body had been found pretty far away from the trail that he had stumbled off of, leading many people to estimate just how far down the mountain he fell, with estimates being between 1/3 or 2/3 of the mountain's height. This event can still be seen on YouTube. His hour-long stream is still available for those who want to watch, especially those who seek to ridicule Tetsu for his reckless stream. The video of his accident has been shared all over the internet, and Tetsu was awarded a Darwin Award, specifically the Pinnacle of Stupidity Darwin Award.
That hurts.
I'm sure all of us remember having crazy ideas as kids. Thinking that if you were to attach balloons to your back, you really could fly. Or thinking that a bed sheet could act as a parachute if you were to jump off of a high balcony or ledge. Those thoughts, while fanciful, do have a little bit of a basis in reality. Cluster ballooning in particular is that
Lawn chair Larry!
Someone attaches a
Alright, when there's a guy in Brazil that tried to spread Christianity or something, or like he was
many people have successfully done this.
Like a missionary, he strapped balloons.
Ballooning. It is a sport that many people still
and he
even if
passed away over the Atlantic
by the obvious danger. You see, cluster ballooning as a sport is pretty dangerous. This is because you can't directly control just how high you fly up. You can't release hot air in order to descend back to the ground. Cluster ballooning is a one-way trip. It will take you up into the sky and continue to take you up there as long as those balloons are attached to your back. And that's only one half of the problem. You see, with a hot air balloon, there's a degree of control that you have over the direction in which your balloon is floating in the sky. But cluster ballooning, there's hardly any control. You see, unlike hot air balloons, you are at the mercy of the wind at your back and the helium balloons that are above you. And the only way you go down is by detaching those balloons, and the only way you can kind of control your direction is by venting your helium from one of your balloons in order for you to correct your direction and not land miles away from where you took off. So yes, the sport seems simple on paper, but it takes a lot of skill in order
and
for
a
you to
lot of balls.
Cluster ballooning. And it's certainly not something that a regular person should do for publicity and on a whim. This is Adelier Antonio de Carli. He was born on February 8th, 1967, and he was a normal guy. He was the third born in his family, and he would live with his parents until his adulthood. He worked as a tire repairman with his father, and then later a gas station attendant at his uncle's gas station. He was described as a quiet and humble person, and for much of his early adulthood, he lived a quiet life in Paraguay, until he decided to join a seminary school in Paranagua. He would join in August of 2003, and he would work hard and graduate in order to be placed at the head of a parish located in the city. At his parish in Paranagua, Adelier Carli would go on to make a positive name for himself, with one of his notable contributions to the town being the Pastoral Rodoviaria, a rest area for truckers. He built this out of necessity to spread God's message, and also as a way to help the community. He would also use his position as the head pastor of his parish.
Yeah, Brazilian, but he's from South America. I knew he was from South America. Yeah, he tried to do his thing, and he died over the Atlantic.
Government officials. An example of his activism was in 2006. When
it's actually nuts how I know all these things.
Violations against the homeless population in Paranagua. The municipal guards of the city were known to take homeless people by force off of the streets, usually at night, and dump them in neighboring towns. And this is what he would dedicate his life to. His day-to-day life would be dedicated to his spiritual beliefs and, of course, to his activism. But in his own opinion, his acts weren't being seen. There just wasn't enough visibility on the problems in the town, and he was only one person. So he tried to think of something to do in order to garner a lot of support and a lot of visibility for all of the evil things that were happening in Paranagua. So, of course, he decided to lean into one of his hobbies, parachuting. He was an experienced skydiver, therefore he was very aware of the act of cluster ballooning, and he thought that a unique attraction like that would garner a lot of attention. And with that attention, he would be able to raise a lot of money not only for his parish, but also for the trucker stop that he had just finished building. So on April 20th, 2008, wearing a helmet, aluminum thermal flight suit, and waterproof coveralls, he would put on his parachute, and then of course, attach to his back 1,000 helium-filled balloons. And during this process, Carly was incredibly calm. You see, this wasn't the first time that he actually did a cluster ballooning stunt. He made an attempt back in January of that year with only 600 balloons as a test flight, and he flew a 4-hour, 17,000-foot high journey. So in April 2008, he decided to attach 400 more balloons to his back with the hopes of flying even higher and extending the duration of his flight. The flight would begin immediately after he was handed a GPS tracker and radio so that he could inform air traffic control of his position. However, 8 hours after taking off, the 41-year-old went off the grid. Planes, helicopters, and rescue teams searched high and wide for the priest, but to no avail. And for many, this was a shock, because this entire event was televised. Many people in the town wanted to see him fly, and they saw him drift up into the sky, but they just never saw him touch down. A whole 2 days after takeoff, something was found off the coast of Brazil. A bunch of multicolored balloons were floating. Sadly, his body wouldn't be found at that time, but it was obvious what had happened. It would take multiple months until his body would be found. His remains would wash up in July on the southeastern coast of Brazil in a very bad condition, with the only means of identifying him being DNA testing. When the police were asked about the discovery, they said, "We were almost certain that it was the priest due to various elements, such as the clothes and material used in the balloon trip. The DNA only confirmed our suspicions." This is Jefferson City. It has a population of 43,228 people and is the capital of the state of Missouri. And like all other small towns in the United States, their crime rate is relatively low and their community is pretty tight-knit. And on October 21st, 2009, that very sense of safety and community would be tested. This is Elizabeth Olten. She was born on December 15th, 1999, the youngest of 5 siblings. And when interviewed, her mother Patricia would go on to say that Elizabeth had a normal and happy childhood. And this sentiment was widespread. It wasn't just shared by her mother, but her extended family and Elizabeth's friends. When asked about Elizabeth's background, her family and friends would say that she loved dogs, dressing up, and baking cookies. And in between all of that, she loved watching Hannah Montana and listening to Taylor Swift. According to her family and her teachers, she was a good student and relatively friendly with her peers. And as she matriculated through school, that remained the case. To all those around her, she seemed to be a normal little girl with friends at school and in her neighborhood. So to say that the town was caught off guard when they heard of what happened on the night of the 21st of October, 2009, would be an understatement, to say the least. Elizabeth was like many children. She was very approachable and very personable, so it's obvious that she would have many friends, with one of those friends being a 15-year-old named Alyssa Bustamante, and her background isn't as cheerful as Elizabeth's. You see, between the years of 2002 and 2009, Alyssa Bustamante was raised by her grandparents. Her mother, Michelle Bustamante, was pretty absent. You see, she had a history of substance abuse issues, which led to criminal charges and jail time. Her father was even less present, because for a bulk of Alyssa's childhood, he was serving jail time for assault. So for the majority of her teenage years, she lived with her grandparents. And the living situation was a little tight. She wasn't the only one living with her grandparents. She was sharing that space with her 3 other siblings, with the home that they were residing in being a ranch home. There just wasn't a lot of space to go around, but they made do because it was a stable situation, relatively. Despite all of that, though, it was a great situation for Alyssa.
I thought I saw that in there for a second. Now I'm sad.
Grow up in, and the benefits of that stability seemed to be obvious to all those around her. She was a normal kid by all appearances. A lot.
She looks like one of my friends that my old school I used to go to.
Kid. She loved to write poems and joke around. People in the community knew of her because she was a regular churchgoer. And as time would go on, she would participate in a lot of local activities, especially the activities
like that picture I can see now, but like one other picture did.
That's what the perception was. No one really knew who Alyssa was. No one knew what was in her mind. And while things seemed okay, things truly weren't. In 2007, it became clear to her friends and family that she was deeply depressed. because at that time she attempted to hurt herself, with the attempt being serious enough to merit 10 days at a psychiatric hospital. And once she was checked out, she would be placed on antidepressants. Unfortunately, though, the medicine just wasn't helping. Her depression persisted, and in an attempt to feel better, she would self-harm anytime she would be alone. And this issue would go unnoticed for an extended period of time. And subsequently, during that time, her mental state would deteriorate. She would go out of her way to frequently show her scars to her friends and other people at school, all while subtly bragging about not taking her antidepressants. She would consistently joke about not taking her antidepressants, and for her friends and family, this was concerning. But this was also her personality. She loved to joke, so it could be a joke, right? These were the questions that her friends and family were dealing with.
No,
and there weren't any answers. And there wouldn't be any until people started looking at Alyssa's
probably
online
should be
profiles,
taking that seriously.
There, you would find a different Alyssa, one that was more forthcoming about her feelings and her thoughts. Alyssa's Twitter page would be the first clue into who she really was. It would talk about how she hated authority, with her online mantra being bad decisions make great stories. On her YouTube and MySpace pages, she would list her hobbies as killing people and cutting. She also posted a YouTube video where she tried to get two of her brothers to try and touch an electric fence. These social media pages would be found after October 21st, 2009, because police officers at that point needed to build a profile on Alyssa. On the evening of October 21st, Elizabeth and Alyssa planned to hang out. You see, Alyssa's younger sister, Emma, rang the doorbell at Elizabeth's house, asking if Elizabeth could come over and play. Elizabeth's mother agreed to the playdate only on the condition that her daughter would be back home by 6 p.m. And the very moment Elizabeth left that house, Elizabeth's mother would never see her again. Once Elizabeth left the house with Alyssa's younger sister, both Alyssa and Elizabeth would begin to walk into a forest. Little did Alyssa know that Elizabeth was luring her in there, away from the homes, claiming that she had a surprise. Elizabeth was wholly unaware of what this supposed surprise would entail. The moment Alyssa thought that they were deep enough in the forest and far enough away from all the homes in the
I
town,
think I might have heard about this one too.
Grab Elizabeth, take out a knife, and then slit her throat. This completely caught Elizabeth off guard. Stunned by her friend's actions, she had no means to defend herself. And the attack just kept going. After the first cut, Alyssa then began to stab Elizabeth multiple times. Dude,
what the hell?
Reveling in the act of taking her friend's life.
Dude.
She would then go on to dump Elizabeth's body in a shallow grave nearby, which she had dug ahead of time before the murder. And during all of this, Elizabeth's family began to worry, because she did not come home at 6 p.m. And as time passed, that worry turned into concern, and that concern turned into a police call. And during all of that, Elizabeth's brother, 13-year-old Anthony, went to search for her. He would run throughout the entire neighborhood and into the forest, where he would find Alyssa and her younger sister, which to his and his family's knowledge was strange. They thought only Alyssa and Elizabeth were going to hang out. So why was Emma there? Apparently, after picking up Alyssa, her younger sister Emma didn't go back home after ringing Elizabeth's doorbell to get her outside. Alyssa had her tag along for this awful event. Interestingly enough, when interviewed about the discovery of Alyssa, Elizabeth's brother said that when he encountered her in the forest, he overheard Alyssa whispering into Emma's ear, "Don't tell anyone." At this point, the cops had arrived, and Elizabeth's mother was distraught. She knew something was wrong. Why wouldn't her young daughter be back at 6 p.m.? Why would she be out so late?
Didn't get a chance to grow up into a nice human being.
Hanging out with a 9-year-old.
Life snuffed out.
That is an important aspect of this entire story. Elizabeth was an incredibly personable girl. She had friends of many ages, so her friendship with Alyssa didn't seem bad. Everyone knew each other in this town, and everyone knew of Alyssa and Elizabeth. They were normal girls, and their friendship up to that point seemed wholesome and normal. So it goes without saying, when AT&T helped the police department ping Elizabeth's phone and found it to be in the same location as Alyssa's phone, people in the town, and of course the local police department, began to ask questions. Why was Alyssa near Elizabeth when she disappeared? What happened?
Now we know.
A day after the disappearance of Elizabeth, 100 people went out of their way to try and track her down. They thought that she was still alive. They thought that they could find her. Suspicion wasn't initially placed on Alyssa, mostly due to the fact that people genuinely thought that she would never do this. Even the FBI...
Like, looking at her, she looks completely normal, like a nice, kind girl. But under that charade is a monster that is willing to take life.
It certainly couldn't have been her friend. She was there in the force with her. So initially, there just had to be a different suspect. It couldn't be her. But of course, as time passed,
she looks innocent.
Those good sentiments started to go.
You would never know what she did if no one told you. I can show you a picture of her right now, and you'd think, oh, that's a... Like, I should show you a picture without telling you what she did. You'd be like, oh, that's an innocent young girl. That's a killer, though. Yes. Lapis.
They learned that Emma's teenage sister Alyssa had joined the girls, something that the community was aware of, but the police were unaware of the fact that Emma was there too. It was a fact that Alyssa and Elizabeth were together, but when questioned, Alyssa didn't bring up her sister Emma, and at that point investigators could tell right away that something was off, and that they definitely needed Alyssa in an interrogation room. From there, they asked her about a shallow, empty hole that they found in the woods near her home, and with that one question, the police, the FBI, and the citizens of St. Martin's, Missouri would be given the answer that they all dreaded. When she was asked about that shallow, empty hole that they found in the woods, Alyssa in the interrogation room immediately said yes, she dug it, and she claimed that it was for fun. From there, the FBI gained a warrant to search her home, where in her bedroom they found even more troubling answers. Her bedroom was full of drawings and writings that were perverse. That, coupled with her social media pages and posts, made Alyssa the #1 suspect in Elizabeth's murder. But that was only the tip of the iceberg. As they searched her bedroom more, they would come across her physical diary, which included an entry from the day of Elizabeth Olten's disappearance. The entry was scribbled out with ink, but investigators uncovered what it said. I just someone. I them and I their throat, and I them and now they're dead. I don't know how I feel at the moment. It was amazing. As soon as you get over the, oh my god, I can't do this feeling, it's pretty enjoyable. I'm kind of nervous and shaky though right now. Okay, I gotta go to church. They found her confession.
She is mentally,
out of her. She wrote it down.
Mentally evil.
The evidence. From there, the
better words I should say.
Alyssa to
mentally
where Elizabeth was buried, and Alyssa
sick.
Didn't fight. She gladly showed them exactly where she buried her friend. And once Elizabeth was identified and her family was informed about her condition, the local news would then tell the entire town that Elizabeth had been found but was not alive, and that her friend, Alyssa Bustamante, was responsible for her murder. To say that the town was shocked is to put it lightly. They never thought that a teenage girl would be capable of such evil. And once the police were interviewed about the case, they only had one thing to say. Alyssa stated that she just wanted to know what it felt like. She was only interested in knowing what it felt like to take another life. And the person she chose to do this to was a friend, because Elizabeth trusted her, making her an easy target. While the case was quick to solve, the next question was punishment. How should a 15-year-old girl be punished for this terrible act? She was a minor after all, so there was a thought that she might not actually see the jail time.
I mean, hey, a minor kills another minor. It should be charged as an adult too.
Tried as an adult. And in 2012, the then 17-year-old pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and armed criminal action. The trial would conclude a year later, where she would ultimately be sentenced to a life in prison plus 30 years for the murder of Elizabeth. I'm sure many of you guys can recognize the crest of the Manchester United Football Club. It's a prominent professional football club based in Old Trafford, located in Manchester, England.
I am not a
football club was established in 1878, when at the time the team was known for playing against other sponsored football clubs, a lot of them being sponsored by railway companies. And over a course of a century, the team became more and more prominent, and of course, more and more profitable. The Bubsy team, in particular, being one of the more notable, because Manchester United had managed to put together a really good football team between the years of 1945 and 1969. The Bubsy team led the second place league finishes in 1947, 1948, and 1949, an FA Cup victory in 1948, and in 1952, the Bubsy team won their first Division League title, which at the time set a record for the Manchester Football Club, because that was the first time.
Even though I'm giving all this deep state to my sister, I'm finding fun in the diamond byproduct.
And those two wins in particular is what gave them their name. They were called the Bubsy Babes because of their football prowess. At the time, the Bubsy Babes were very well liked and unique in the fact that most of their players were very young. That's why they were called the Bubsy Babes. It was not only meant to reflect all of their wins, but also the youthfulness of the entire team. And as time would go on, their matches with other teams would leave the area of Manchester, therefore requiring the team to take an airplane ride to meet up with teams in order to play. And on February 6th of 1958, the team chartered a flight, and the scheduling was tight. The Bubsy team only had the weekdays to play European matches. That means they were flying back and forth from the European continent in order to make the domestic matches that were only scheduled on the weekend. So on February 6, 1958, once they touched down back in Manchester, the team only had a little bit of time to play a domestic match and then immediately fly all the way to Belgrade. The club chartered a BEA plane from Manchester to Belgrade for a long away leg against the Red Star. And once they arrived and played the game, the match was a drawn 3-3, but it was enough to send the United to the semifinals. The semifinal match is located in Munich, so they had to take another flight from Belgrade, which was difficult to schedule, and once they did get it, it was delayed. At this moment, the team was stranded in Belgrade, waiting for this plane to arrive. It would take a couple hours for the plane to arrive, and the team boarded, all while the plane was refueling. At 2:19 p.m., the control tower at Munich was told that the plane was ready for takeoff and gave clearance for a takeoff. But the plane didn't leave the tarmac. You see, the co-pilot abandoned the takeoff after his captain, James Tane, noticed the port boost pressure gauge fluctuating as the plane reached full power. The engine sounded odd while accelerating. After 3 minutes of tinkering, they decided to try again, but that attempt was futile. Within 40 seconds, they stopped the liftoff because the engines were running in an overreach mixture, causing them to overheat, a common problem with this plane called the Elizabethan. After the second engine failure, all of the passengers were taken off the plane. By then, it started to snow heavily, and it looked unlikely that the plane would be making a return journey. Thane then told the station engineer, Bill Black, about the problem with the boost surging in the port engine. The station engineer suggested that the plane should be retuned in the hangar overnight, and that if the engine seemed to be malfunctioning, not once, but twice, he would express his concern in saying that he felt that the plane should not be flying. The captain was anxious. He disagreed. The captain wanted to stay on schedule, and he felt that if he opened up the throttle even more slowly, the plane should be able to take off, and the flight should be fine. Whether or not he was aware of the fact that this would mean that the plane would not achieve takeoff velocity until further down the runway is unknown. In his opinion, he felt that the runway was long enough for this problem. Even if it was under 2 miles long, the captain felt that he had just enough runway to make the takeoff possible, even with a malfunctioning engine. All of the passengers were then put back on the plane, with many of the Manchester United players being concerned about the plane's condition, with a lot of the conversation between them being made up of questions and hypotheticals about who can pilot the plane if an accident were to occur. Billy Willian in particular said, "This may be death, but I'm ready." The plane captain would initiate takeoff at 3 o'clock. He would pull the plane into the runway, and at around 3:02 they were told they were cleared for takeoff, and that it would expire in 2 minutes. The pilots agreed to attempt to take off, but they would watch the instruments for surging in the engines. And at 3:03 p.m., they told the control tower of their decision. His co-pilot moved the throttle slowly and released the brakes, and then the plane began to accelerate. As the plane traveled down the runway, going through all of the snow, it threw up slush as it gathered speed. At 85 knots, or 100
I feel like it'd be a bad idea to take a plane off like that on slush or snow.
Leading the co-pilot to pull back on the throttle.
Not an aerodynamics person, but you know,
pushing it
I
forward.
feel like that wouldn't be the best
The plane gathered even more speed,
idea.
up to 217 kilometers per hour. And while initially everything seemed fine, the actions of the co-pilot may have pushed the throttle a little too high. Around 217 kilometers is when both pilots announced to the passengers and air traffic control that they intend to abort the takeoff with the hopes of slowing down the plane before it left the runway. 220 kilometers per hour is the minimum required to get off the ground. The captain was watching all the instruments inside of the plane and expected the speed to rise, but the plane simply did not gain any more speed. The plane's speed would fluctuate around 217 kilometers per hour before suddenly dropping to 207 kilometers per hour and then 194. From there, the co-pilot shouted, "Christ, we won't make it," and at that very moment, the plane skidded off the end of the runway and crashed into a fence surrounding the airport and across the road. When the plane went across the road, its port wing caught the house that was torn off. It would be revealed later that 6 people lived in that house. The father and the eldest daughter were away, and the mother and 3 other children escaped as the house caught on fire. Part of the plane's tail was torn off before the left side of the cockpit hit a tree. The right side of the fuselage hit a wooden hut, inside of which was a truck filled with tires and fuel, which exploded. During and after the crash, the captain noticed that there was flames around the cockpit, and he feared that the airplane would explode. The stewardess were the first to leave the plane out of a blown-out emergency window, and they would be followed by 2 radio officers. The captain and co-pilot were still inside of the cockpit, with the co-pilot being stuck in his seat by a crumpled fuselage, and he told his captain to go without him. The captain would then crawl out the same emergency window. On reaching the ground, he saw flames growing under the starboard wing, which held 2,300 liters of jet fuel. At this point, only 5 people are outside of the plane. There were still countless numbers of passengers and additional airplane staff stuck in the plane. So after seeing how dangerous the situation is, the captain decides to jump back into the plane and warn everyone that the plane is on fire and everyone needs to get out before this plane explodes. He, with the help of a few other staff members, managed to save some passengers, with 2 of those passengers being members of Manchester United. Everyone else was either too injured or too stuck to get out of the plane. The plane wouldn't explode, but it would burn. A lot. All the way down to its cinders. 20 passengers died at the scene. Another died on the way to the hospital, along with 2 other passengers that would die a month later in the hospital. Manchester United players, Manchester United staff, and the journalists meant to document their game in Munich all perished. There simply wasn't enough time for them to get out of the plane, with many of them dying from either their injuries from the crash, asphyxiation from the smoke, or what many sources would describe as thermal injuries.
Thermal injuries. They're just burning. I expose some more diamonds.
Hello everyone, it's your boy Aylerus, aka Panda Daddy, and I hope you enjoyed today's newest installment of the r/Morphle Reality series, and I hope you really liked it on this very spooky day, Halloween. I hope that it made your day a little bit more awesome and entertaining. I know many of you guys are having a good time today, so why not accompany all of those good feelings with a really good piece of content, one that you guys have been looking forward to for the better part of 2 months, so I really hope that this video satisfies your hunger. And of course, there's going to be even more Morphle Reality content coming down the pipeline, so keep your notifications on and keep your eyes open for that. That's going to be wonderful, and I hope a lot of you guys enjoy those future videos. In the
Yay! Yay! I love diamonds. My bad thing about shulker is that there's such a pain in the ass to drain. I mean, like, you have to, like individually click and click. You can't just, like, break a chest and all stuff will pop out. You know you're fast with a nitro, and I can make the deep dark, or kind of like the caves song start playing at the beginning, at the top surface. I think I might not. Imagine she's like, I don't want deep slate. Hell, even if she said she didn't want deep slate, dude, that's still a lot I could take. What I really need is tough. That poor melon. And you got a skill issue. Before I leave, I'm going to... We have blow just and you guys know where that's going. You know how like I go up that beacon, there's a cave, I end, and then it goes back to being solid, and it then goes up to my like, area up here? That's your fault, you dumbass golem. You got in my way. Sorry, villagers. Trying to break into here so I can actually go get him. That was bound to happen. Oh, I love those old classic Minecraft themes. I love getting them. Slimy slime. Alright, we're gonna sign off today. Next goal, our goal is to get my sister some deep sleep. She's gonna be coming tomorrow and she's gonna be staying for a week and then she can hopefully come back on Christmas break. But yeah, so we may have an extra guest tomorrow. See you tomorrow after noon. Or probably after like 2 o'clock this my time.